Mr. Rouse and Mr. Bellucci are running a little bit behind, but if it's okay, out of respect to our dear friends, they came from schools, we'll go ahead and get started, Mr. Leahy.
Okay, well, good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Our first meeting today is to discuss the issue of reversion funds and the Achievable Dream Academy. I'm going to introduce Jonathan Hobbs, who's one of our co-acting directors for the Budget and Management Services, and he will introduce our dignitaries from the school board.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Leahy. Mr. Dyer, members of the City Council. Today, I'm just going to provide you with a very brief overview of the school's request for their fiscal year 2019 reversion funding. So just wanted to start with, where did this funding come from? In fiscal year 2019, the schools underspent their budgeted appropriations in their operating fund by $18 million. They also underspent approximately $881,000 in two of their other funds. In addition to this, the schools also over-realized about $8 million from the sources that you see there on the slide. In terms of the city and schools revenue sharing formula revenues actually were under-realized in the general fund by about $2.2 million in fiscal year 19, which meant that $745,000 had to be reduced from the allocation to schools. So that amount was taken from the reversion amount, leaving us with the $26.1 million that reverted to the city. So earlier this fall, the schools submitted to us a request for the reappropriation of this $26.1 million. They are requesting that $5.8 million be appropriated to the School Reserve Special Revenue Fund, $438,000 to the School Athletic Fund, $12.5 million to their operating fund, and that would be used for the implementation of full-day kindergarten, as well as the purchase of replacement school buses, replacement whiteboards, fleet vehicles, the replacement of various equipment, radios, and some stage curtains at 6 of their schools. In addition to the request for appropriation to their operating budget, they're also requesting $7.4 million to their CIP. And you'll note the 6 projects listed here are the projects that they are requesting the appropriation for. I would note that 5 of these projects are in the existing CIP, with the exception being the expansion of Lynn Haven Middle School, the first project listed there. That is a request for the establishment of a new CIP in the fiscal year 2019-2020 CIP, and that would receive an appropriation of $4 million as part of this request. So that's all that I have, and at this point I'll turn it over to,
A question, Rosemary?
How much of that is for school buses?
the amount that they are requesting for school buses, I want to say, is 2.7 million, yes ma'am.
It's usually about 2.5 million. And I just wanted to make a comment that it really is a recurring fund, expense.
I'll address, I think I can address that.
No, you don't, it's fine. I just wanted to say, we were using reversion money for school buses when I was on the school board 30 years ago, and that maybe we just ought to just start putting it into the regular budget.
We have been, I think I can address that.
Okay.
This is in addition to the 40 buses we've gotten into the operating.
Oh, okay, so this is a new, yeah.
Well, how about I tackle that in my comments?
Okay.
Tackle it.
That'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you.
John?
I just want to mention that, I don't know about other people, but I submitted questions Tuesday evening and got no responses other than the ones that came from city staff. And we just want the public to know, we just had this put in our place today. And I think it's somewhat unprofessional to give us bunches of information that we do not have the opportunity to properly research and look at and digest before people start presenting information, and we are unprepared to cross-examine that information. So this is a bad practice.
Okay.
And
Thank
in
you,
the
John.
future, I hope that they can be responsive and provide information in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mayor Dyer, members of City Council, and Mr. Leahy. So with me this afternoon are members of our staff, our Chief Financial Officer, Farrell Honziker, along with our Chief Communications Officer, Chief Operations Officer, as well as a number of our school board members, including our chair, Beverly Anderson, and Dan Edwards, who is the chair of the ad hoc committee on the Achievable Dream Academy. Also here I want to mention is Lee Vreeland, who is CEO of the Achievable Dream Academy and members of her Virginia Beach board. It's worth noting that members of our senior leadership and school board were here last week, but were not able to enter council chambers, as I believe you were informed. So I do want to thank you for the opportunity to come back and discuss this resolution with you. I understand there were a number of questions, and I'd like to start by addressing some of those. I have the reversion resolution here. There's a copy in your packet, and just to reiterate what was said, they're requesting $26 million, $7.5 million for the CIP fund, $12.5 million in the school operating fund, $5.8 to the school reserve special revenue fund, and $438,000 for the athletics fund. It's been said that the likely cause of the school board reversion request is the failure to properly execute the over $900 million school board budget, and I'd like to just be emphatically clear here. Allegations of poor financial management are not true. The school board's budget, Office of Budget Development, Office of Business Services, and Chief Financial Officer are consistently recognized by their peers and reviewing organizations as amongst the best in the business. The external audits of our budget, which occur every year, have, during my tenure, returned no findings and have in fact made note of the degree to which our financial controls and business practices reflect industry standards at the highest level. So allegations of financial mismanagement, and that was actually the language that was used in the last session, are very serious and we don't think should be taken lightly. At issue seems to be the notion that by having funds available for reversion, we are simply under-executing the budget. This is predicated, it seems, on an assumption that a school division ought to drive its budget to zero on an annual basis. In my 25 years as a professional educator and my 20 years as a school and district administrator, I've never known any school division, any school board, any superintendent, any auditor, any chief financial officer, or anybody in my field who understands this to be best financial accounting practice. In fact, in every school division where I've worked, there's been either a reversion or a fund balance at the end of the school year. And I mentioned fund balance because in many school divisions in America, maintaining fund balance is a required part of their financial practice. Virginia is one of only a handful of states that require those balances to revert to the appropriating body. So I think at the heart of this conversation is a philosophical understanding of what's appropriate when it comes to reversion funds. And I think it's fairly simple. Should school divisions spend everything, or should they practice sound financial management so there's some percentage available for contingencies? And we believe it's the latter. In a memo to our school board dated on March 26, 2019, Farrell Honziker and I explained our thinking on this matter. Specifically, we noted that it's generally accepted practice in government budgeting to not spend to zero. To do so would be irresponsible, and we're concerned would place the school division in a position to be over budget should the unpredictable occur. Things like severe weather, a rise in utility costs, fuel costs, a shortfall in revenue, that sort of thing. And I should note that during my tenure here, we have had a shortfall in revenue from the state, and you've just heard about a shortfall in budgeted from the city council. So these things do occur, and for further context, we also provided a review of fund balance positions, guidelines, standards across local governments and school divisions, as well as guidelines that have been published by the Government Finance Officers Association and the Association of School Business Officials. So although there's not a universal standard, our review has identified a wide range of suggested minimums that should be kept in fund balance, including required minimums across many organizations. For example, the Government Finance Officers Association recommends a minimum fund balance of 2 months of either revenues or expenditures. So for Virginia Beach, in context, that would be $124 million. We provided additional detail in this memo and have provided a copy of that memo in the packet before you. So I'm saying all that merely to point out that maintaining some funds is normal accounting practice. In fact, it's clear, I think, that council agrees with that philosophy as it maintains a fund balance, which as of 2017-18 was $171 million, or approximately 13% of the city's budget. And of that, $113 million was undesignated. So I'll mention here that in a recent briefing to City Council on the city's bond rating, it was noted that a healthy fund balance is actually one of the factors taken into consideration by bond rating agencies, and that schools as a component unit of the city's budget are reviewed as a part of that process as well. And I think as another example, reversion requests from the school board are not new, and the City Council has approved these requests every year in the last decade. In other words, it's not as if the school board has simply mismanaged its funds in the last year or two, and this is a surprise to council, this request. So I have a copy for you of our reversion fund history since 2009-10 school year in your packet. It's the long sheet on legal. And as you can see, during that time, The reversion amounts have fluctuated, but on average have been approximately 2% of the school division's overall budget. Importantly, during that time, a significant portion of the funds have been used to offset general fund costs as a result of lost revenues due to the recession. This is that structural imbalance that we've talked about since I've been here. Largely, those revenue losses were a result of cuts to state funding. On the reversion fund history sheet, if you look under the funds category, you'll see a line item called Special Reserve Fund, which was mentioned earlier. This is where that money goes. And I'll come back to this later, but you will note, if you look at that history, we've been working to bring that number down considerably from a high of $16 million in 2013 to a low of $5.8 million in the latest reversion resolution. I also want to note that school division reversions are contemplated as a part of normal practice by the state, as the process for addressing them is in state code. And finally, I know it was suggested last week that council should have a policy on school board reversions, and I'd like to point out that the city contemplates the process for school board reversion requests in its ordinance on the revenue sharing formula, which you adopted last month. Section 6 clearly outlines how those reversions are to occur, how those requests might be made, and the purposes and mechanisms by which those funds might be used. In other words, this is an anticipated process, and we should not be talking about it as financial mismanagement. While we may not agree as individuals, we can at least agree for the purpose of today's discussion, assume that a reversion might happen regularly, as it has for the last decade plus, and I would like to address why we had these funds available, the specifics of the reversion, and why the board chose to prioritize as they did. So the bulk of reversion funds are created by vacancies and conservative business practices. 84% of our budget, as you know, is allocated to our human resources, including salaries and benefits. So with over 13,000 full and part-time employees, vacancies are going to occur and cannot be anticipated. And I say that because we create positions driven largely by state standards of quality and operational needs, and they fluctuate year to year, including the types of positions which are not filled and the duration of those vacancies. Those vacancies also fluctuate depending, by the way, on the state of the economy. So we budget based on the positions we know we need in order to best serve the children of our school division. And with vacancy factors sometimes outside of our control, this is not about under-executing our budget. Neither the CFO nor I would recommend to the school board the under-budgeting of necessary positions given the unpredictable nature of vacancies, and nor can we, by the way, under-budget SOQ or standard of quality positions that are required by the state. So let's address the current reversion resolution and request from our school board for $26 million. As was noted last week, about $8 million of those dollars were unanticipated revenues. In other words, these are funds that were received over budget and the school board simply could not have budgeted for. So that is, in fact, great news for the city of Virginia Beach and for the children of our city. In addition to that means the economy is churning. In addition to those $8 million, there were significant funds that we had to plan for and set aside during the 2018-19 school year. This was over $11 million that we had to plan for and hold back and set aside to ensure that needs which had been communicated clearly to and by the school board in advance could be met during the 2019-20 school year. These include that $5.8 million for the School Reserve Special Revenue Fund, as I mentioned, but these monies are set aside to offset operating costs and balance the budget. It should be obvious that both the school board and the city council were aware of this request since we signaled it in the school board's operating budget for 1920. This also includes funding for CSEP classrooms at $673,000. These are CIP funds that became available as a part of a regional special education cooperative program to bring those classrooms that are in our schools into line with the technology and other resources that we provide to our students in our classrooms. And finally, there are $4.9 million which we had set aside in 2018-19 and include in this reversion request specifically at your direction, at the direction of City Council through your budget ordinance. These monies are for the completion of our full-day kindergarten implementation. So in your packet, you have this chart. It's labeled Fiscal Year 2018-19 Reversion Funds. As you can see, the first section includes the total amount. The second section shows the unanticipated revenues totaling $8 million. And the third section shows the $11.3 million assigned for the specific purposes just discussed. If you subtract our unanticipated revenues and the money set aside for specific purposes that were already contemplated by the school board and city council, the available reversion funds would stand at $6.6 million. And as you can see on the chart, that represents less than 1% of our operating budget. So clearly, I don't believe we are recklessly under-executing our budget. Now let's talk specifically about what's included in the reversion resolution. I know we've talked in broad terms about the funds. In your packet, you do have a copy of the resolution. We've recommended $5.8 million again appropriated to the School Reserve Special Revenue Fund to balance the operating budget, and recommended an appropriation of $438,000 to the Athletics Fund. These are unspent funds which, if reverted, will be used for the purchase of equipment and uniforms. We've recommended the appropriation of approximately $7.3 million to the CIP Fund. These monies include funds for elementary school playground equipment replacement, classroom furniture, and technology. The largest line item is for the establishment of a CIP project for Lynn Haven Middle School expansion to house the grades 6 through 12 Achievable Dream Academy. So let's talk about that for just a moment. There were a number of comments made during the last meeting about whether or not it's appropriate to put funding into a CIP project that is not fully funded. I'd like to take the opportunity just to remind everyone that this is normal practice. Funds are typically allocated to projects in stages. The ordinance you are considering is to establish a CIP project, not to fully fund it. In this case, the school board is requesting these funds to begin A&E services so the project can be planned. And just to be clear, in my tenure in Virginia Beach, there have always been projects in the 6-year CIP that have not been fully funded. For example, in our approved 2019 through 25 CIP for the school board, which you approved as a part of your budget ordinance, you'll note, and I have on the screen here, that Princess Anne High School CIP Project 1-107, which has been in the CIP since I've been here, is appropriated $89 million by 2025. That is approximately 70% of the overall project cost. Should also note that in the City Council CIP, you have similar projects. For example, your CIP project for the Centerville Turnpike Phase 3, a $38 million project, is currently appropriated only $3.9 million. And I raise those examples simply to note that to suggest that the school board may not fulfill its obligation to complete a project it has established in the CIP is without historical basis and does not adhere to our practice. So the question was asked, well, how might that funding become available? As was discussed, current plans include the sale of property, specifically the Laskin Road Annex. However, if that were not possible, but I do need to state we are confident that there is interest in that property, as the school board has received unsolicited offers on the property prior to marketing, then other mechanisms we have used to fund projects include pay-as-you-go or pay-go through reversions, as well as the sale of other properties and funding through the sale of bonds. There have been questions about whether or not Lynn Haven Middle School is the appropriate site for the Achievable Dream Academy, and a specific comment made relative to this was that a good program is not a waiver for good analysis. Well, I would agree with that, and it's my position, and I presume it's the position of the ad hoc committee members who studied the Achievable Dream Committee for the last year and a half, on which City Council was represented by Rosemary Wilson, that the school board engaged in a full analysis of the appropriateness of the Lynn Haven Middle School site for the addition of a standalone facility for the Achievable Dream Academy. I mentioned standalone specifically because the Achievable Dream Academy is not a school within a school model. Rather, it is a whole school model, and the intention for this addition is that students in the Achievable Dream Academy will have full and exclusive access to that facility. What I can say is that the ad hoc committee considered at least 3 sites and debated the merits and economics of each relative to the program objectives of the Achievable Dream Academy. I should also note that the school board affirmed that decision by vote. There have been a number of other questions asked about the Achievable Dream Academy, and we've provided those responses, but I do want to note again that Lee Vreeland is here, and she's going to be available at the end to answer any remaining questions about the program and perhaps address the issue of standalone versus school within a school. However, before we get to those, I'd like to briefly discuss the remaining items in the reversion resolution. So our final request was to appropriate $12.5 million to the school operating fund. As has been noted, $4.9 million of this is for the full-day kindergarten, at the City Council's direction. $3 million is intended to replace interactive whiteboards, and questions were raised about the appropriateness of that as a priority. As has been discussed at some length with our school board, approximately 10 years ago, the school division purchased interactive whiteboards for every classroom using federal stimulus dollars. That was actually a very smart decision by the school board at that time, because using those stimulus dollars for ongoing expenses, like many school divisions did, would have created an operational deficit when those stimulus dollars went away, which they did. However, these whiteboards are now failing, and parts are no longer available to repair them. And so for the past several years, we have developed and been implementing a plan to replace them with smart panels. As was noted last week, this is part of our evolution as a school system. And unlike traditional chalkboards, these panels allow students and teachers to fully interact with the technology available to them. If you've talked to our teachers, they'll tell you they love them, they use them every day, and if you've talked to those who don't yet have them replaced, they'll tell you they're waiting for that to happen. Our plan to replace these whiteboards with these panels is a phased plan using a combination of existing technology dollars and, as we did last year, reversion funds. We're building our operating budget so that we can get into a replacement cycle so that we're not faced with a similar all failing at once problem in the future. However, for context, to simply replace all of the whiteboards that were purchased 10 years ago at one time, the cost would be approximately $14.5 million. So to date, we've put $5 million towards that project. This reversion request would move us further along, and I will state this is an instructional priority. Also included in the $2.7 million, also included is $2.7 million for replacement school buses, and I appreciate the question about shouldn't these be in our operating funds. Let me just state, we have been building our operating budget to address the replacement of school buses. This continues to be an unmet need because in order to maintain a 15-year replacement cycle on our school buses, we need to purchase 50 buses a year. In our operating budget, we have built it up to where we are purchasing roughly 40 buses a year, and we're supplementing that with these reversion requests. And we will continue to try to build our operating budget to get through the 50 bus a year cycle. And I do want to be clear, that's a safety issue. Also included are replacement white fleet vehicles. These are the vehicles used primarily by our maintenance staff, our facilities staff. Many of these vehicles are between 15 and 20 years old with mileage approaching 300,000 miles. We're very conservative in our replacement of these vehicles, and we will continue to monitor those needs. There are a number of other requests for the operating fund. As you might imagine, there are an incredible number of competing and unmet needs that the school board must consider, and which we include in my estimate of needs every year. These requests in this resolution represent a very small portion of those and include, in addition to what I just discussed, things like the replacement of aging stage curtains to support our fine arts program and the addition of two-way radios that are needed to support enhancements to our school safety and security program. Because the school board and the city council have jointly discussed the urgent need for construction funding, it has been suggested that perhaps these funds could be used exclusively to fund the CIP. Certainly, the school board has shared its priorities for construction funding in a number of ways with council. In the approved capital improvement program, its priorities are outlined in the section titled Modernization Program. In addition, at a joint meeting of council and the board last year, the long-range facilities plan was shared. And at the recent 5-year forecast joint meeting, Mr. Honziker shared various funding models for the CIP and their likely impact on debt service. So just as a reminder and for context, the state used to provide approximately $14 million annually for school construction, and this funding was discontinued in 2010-11. So we do believe, and I know Chairwoman Anderson has stated, that the school board and city council do need to meet to address potential funding models for the identified $1 billion of school construction needs, as well as the multi-billion-dollar city CIP needs. And to be certain, using reversion funds to offset losses in state funding could be considered as a part of that conversation. But I do think it's important to state that construction needs are not the school division's only needs. That is, while we have those significant construction needs, I know most council members understand that just as the city does, we have any number of other needs that must be met. Every request the school board's made in the past 10 years has included priorities outlined in the unmet needs discussed by the school board during its budget deliberations. Every item in the school board's request on which you're deliberating today is necessary and will be used in the service of the children of this city and the furthering of their education. So I have comments in the packet of my comments, copies of my comments for the record. They may be helpful as you discuss them this evening, and I do want to at least note that neither I nor my board members will be available to be here this evening because we have a regularly scheduled board meeting. Mr. Honziker will be here, however, to answer questions. So thank you for your time today. And now, Farrell Honziker, our board members, Lee Vreeland, and I do stand ready to answer your questions.
Any questions? Jess?
I stepped out for just a minute, so you may have touched on this.
Sure.
The item $434,344 to the athletic fund. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what specifically that's for?
Sure. So
'Cause I couldn't find any details.
yeah, absolutely. So those are funds that are generated through athletic revenues, so through gate receipts, for example. And then if we don't spend all those funds at the end of the year, we didn't used to, but we're now reverting them to the city.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be used largely to offset the cost of equipment purchase. So every year, For example, we're renewing on a cycle the football equipment, and we renew the soccer equipment, and so on and so forth. And so it's to really deal with uniforms and equipment costs.
Is there not a mechanism where you guys don't have to go back to reversion funds? You guys can just use those?
So we used to not revert those athletic funds, and I think about 2 years ago, there was a determination made, maybe at the city attorney level, I'm not sure where it came from, that we needed to go ahead and revert those as well. And so we started doing that and asking for those back.
It just would make more sense if they're generated from the schools that they use. That's what I have for right now. I have more questions, but I gotta find them.
Okay, Ms. Moss.
I just have one question, because I'll do most of my talking later this evening after I've had a chance to read the material I just received. But I know one of the things I asked for, and I appreciate Ms. Wilson's service on it, but I can't recall any liaison reports or any reports that came out of that process where we had a chance to see it. So can we get a copy of the analysis that was done of the alternatives that were looked at and why they were discarded? You know I asked for that last Tuesday, but I still haven't received it, but it would be nice if I could receive that, even though we do vote maybe before then, but I would like to have that, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John.
Yeah, and I could just speak briefly, if it's okay, to the analysis that was done. So there were 3 properties that were considered. The initial conversation was whether or not it could be a school within a school. And maybe I'll ask Lee to come on up and just talk about why we turned from that and looked at some other options. But I can speak to the other options, and we can provide you the minutes.
Right, thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, hi. Yes, so we have tried the school within a school model. That was the first program mechanism that we used in Newport News. So when our students would graduate from 8th grade in Newport News, they would go to a traditional high school that was 1,600 students. We did that for 8 years total, and what we found was that it was not the best format for our students. They had been in a small culture that taught a social, academic, and moral education on a year-round basis. And when they made the transition to a traditional public high school, they were not as successful as they had been when they were in a school of our own. When we opened the middle and high school in Newport News, we saw the huge difference in our statistics. We had always maintained 100% on-time graduation rate, but the percentage of students who received an advanced studies diploma, the percentage of students who maintained over a 3.0 dramatically increased. Our discipline numbers decreased significantly, and our attendance rates went much higher. We also were able to work with them more diligently on placement after high school, which is why we feel that it is not an option in Virginia Beach to do a school within a school program. When we made a commitment as an organization to come to Virginia Beach, we committed to ourselves and to the public school division to provide the same excellent results that we've had in Newport News, and we feel that this is the model that it is required in order to do so.
I got one follow-up question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, oh, sure.
Since our goal is always to provide every student of a like need the same quality of education, have you done the fiscal analysis? How many of the eligible population that would be in this school but citywide exist? And what would be the fiscal requirement for us to build an individualized school for the total eligible population that needs this kind of service?
Yeah, well, total eligible population is not necessarily something that's ever been contemplated, because in Virginia Beach, you're talking about 40% of the student population being in one school. Not possible.
I didn't say one school, but in building these multiple
Yeah, well-
separate facilities around the city.
So again, I'll let Achievable Dream folks speak to Achievable Dream's model, but their model is not to come in and provide the same level of service to every child. Their model is to create an academy to which some children can attend, and then provide that level of wraparound services for them. And then Virginia Beach does its part with the rest of our students.
Well, my only concern is I think we as a body and anyone who's elected should not like to think that some people are chosen and some people are not, that everyone that has the same necessary requirement and impediments and barriers to advancement should receive the same level of service.
My answer to that, Mr. Moss, would be that we have partnerships throughout the city. So we have numerous partnerships in education, and they work with all of our schools. This is a different partnership than we have in some of our other schools, but we have lots of other partnerships across the city where people are coming in, bringing in wraparound services. For example, in the Bayside community, we've got communities and schools operating. That's a different program than the Achievable Dream, but they bring wraparound services into the building for children who need them. So I think it's a matter of looking for fit and looking for the partnerships that work in the school communities and working with the principals in those communities to tackle those.
Well, I think what parents look for is equality of outcome. So the fact that you have different models, if all of them aren't equally successful, then industry, you go to the most successful model and you get rid of the ones that aren't as successful. So I just think you need to be cognizant of and think about as you develop an outcome and an expectation. If you don't think other people in other areas whose programs are producing less outcome, less effective results, aren't going to be asking for the same outcomes, I think you're probably mistaken, because the people are very attentive to the differences across the city of terms of educational outcomes. So I just think you
Well,
need to be thinking
I
about
think,
that.
Mr. Moss, my short answer is we think about that every day. We are deeply focused on equity and really on outcomes for all of our students. And I think if you saw that when we got here, 16 of our schools weren't accredited, and they were all in the high poverty communities in our city, and that all of those schools are fully accredited and have been sitting there fully accredited for 3 years, that's a testament to the fact that we are thinking about that every day, and that's what our team's here for. So we appreciate that.
I have other
Mr.
questions
Wood.
for other
So
environment.
I just a specific question about the academy. So it is a school within a school in the elementary age, right?
The full school is now Achievable Dream. So it is a Virginia Beach City Public School, but every single student, K-5, receives Achievable Dream benefits.
So does every one of those kids in theory is going to go to this new facility?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that was part of the, to get back to the, what did the ad hoc committee consider conversation, that was part of the dialogue, so we're thinking about, okay, how can we achieve their objective of not a school within a school model, but also build a facility that would work for Achievable Dream? Because just for a little bit further context, before I got here, we had entered into an agreement with Achievable Dream Academy, and as a part of that agreement, we did agree to provide a facility for them. And so the discussion really for the ad hoc committee was thinking, okay, we're at a point now, we've got sixth graders and seventh graders, we need to figure this out. And so the initial conversation was, could we do in a school? The answer was no. And then the conversation from there went to what some options were. The options that we ultimately put on the table were the Laskin Road Annex, thinking about using the Laskin Road Annex for a school. And in that scenario, they would have had to come in and do significant rebuild because it's not a school fit for children at this point, which is why we're trying to get rid of it as a property. And the cost to do that was prohibitive. It was well beyond the cost of a new addition at Lynn Haven Middle School. The other one was a new addition at SeaTac Elementary School, but because of some of the issues with the property back there, that also would have been cost prohibitive.
So if I can.
Yeah, sure.
So what's the total population K-12 when it's completely filled out? How many students?
I think it's roughly 1,100, isn't it? Yeah, roughly 1,100.
Okay. So I think I heard somebody talk about it last week. So the students there, they would have the opportunity to do extracurricular and sport activities at Lynn Haven or?
At Lynn Haven Middle for the middle school students, and then at First Colonial High School for the high school students. And again, another thing that's at least worth mentioning is that this is sort of the normal feeder pattern for the SeaTac community. So Lynn Haven Middle School and First Colonial High School is part of the normal feeder pattern, and that was a lot of the conversation with the ad hoc committee in terms of citing this.
So and I heard you say addition, so it's not a separate school, it's an addition.
It would be kind of an annex on the back side of the property, facing out towards the athletic fields. It would have a separate entrance and really be school within a school with the exception of joint use of the cafeteria and gym facilities.
Thank you.
Okay, Barbara, then Rosemary.
Well, I guess a part of the thing is that, I really didn't understand all of the commitments we were making to this program, and, maybe we just need to be brought up to speed. It's clearly a wonderful program, and I don't think anybody's questioning that at all. But I can tell you that in these recent meetings that we've had with the school board, I've heard very loud and clear, very clearly, that the school board feels very strongly that we, the city council, have got to come up with a way to fund the replacement and modernization of the schools. And, I've been looking a lot at this listing of the schools that are in this backlog, and how in the world are we ever going to fund these schools? And because I had heard that message, I was very surprised last week to see the request for a new CIP item of almost $13 million for a new facility. And what I really have to be assured of is that the school board feels unequivocally that the very top priority for this $13 million is this project. And in trying to understand, I appreciate your response to the questions that I had sent last week, and I appreciate the ability to read the MOA. You know, in looking at this and trying to understand it, I can appreciate your looking at the experience of Newport News of saying that they need to all be together. Clearly, in the MOA, you know, they talked about how to provide the elementary school site and the middle school site and the high school site. And of course, the high schoolers won't begin to become a part of this program until 2021-22. And as I read what's in the MOA, each year between 75 and 90 children, students of the new grade level will come in. And at total, the secondary population will be a minimum of 300 students and a maximum of 360 students.
That's for middle, and then they would be the same for high, so it would be close to 700 total.
Oh, okay, I was just reading from the MOA as it's written here. So as I was looking at this, I was looking at the fact that the high school component needs room for 360 students. And in looking at all of the schools that we have, you know, we have some overcapacity, or several of our schools are under capacity. We've got a lot of unused capacity. And I believe one of the answers to the question said that beginning with this school year, there are 23 school zones in the Achievable Dream Zone.
So just to offer clarity on that, that just means that students in those schools can elect to attend the Achievable Dream. They're not actually operating in those schools.
I mean, but they are eligible for the
That's
program,
correct.
is
That's
that
correct.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
So in looking at what schools would be available in that, of course, I looked at Ocean Lakes High School, and it's under capacity by over 600 students, and, you know, it seems to me that 360 students could be phased in over a 5-year period without terrible difficulty. And you know, it's this making certain that this $13 million is in the place that it can serve the best purpose. Then I looked at our CIP, and I know that Princess Anne High School is the next one scheduled to be replaced. But then I see that the one after that is Betty F. Williams. And Betty F. Williams comes in fiscal year 25-26 just as $1 million to begin the funding. But then Betty F. Williams doesn't get completely rebuilt until 2029. That's 10 years from now. And when I look at what it says, that Betty F. Williams was originally built in 1961, and the Bayside sixth grade campus was originally built in 1957, and they could no longer accommodate their instructional programs and need to be replaced. I worry about those students because they're clearly in buildings that definitely need to be replaced and are not going to be replaced for 10 years. So along the lines of what Mr. Moss was talking about, where's the equality? Do we really go to the ultimate optimum to make certain that we are providing for these students while we have these other students who are clearly not receiving what they need? I would like to do both. I would think that if we, instead of put that $4 million reversion fund in this budget year in Betty F. Williams and committed to using the Old Lincoln School, roughly $13 million for Betty F., we could advance that school. So I'm looking at an alternative. If we didn't do this, what else could we do? And so it gets to be hard, and it gets to be hard to explain to the public what our choices are and how we are choosing what we're choosing. I kind of feel like today I'm choosing between these students and those students because we only have a certain amount of money, and how we spend it, we have to be answerable to the public. So I hope you can give me a good answer that will give me comfort if I see that these students over here are getting the ultimate, but these students have to wait 10 years. How are we going to do something for those folks?
I think you could ask that about any of the schools that need to be rebuilt in the city, Ms. Henley.
Not as bad as Betty F. Williams, though.
Well,
That one seems to be pretty bad.
Talk to the folks in Bayside High School and in First Colonial High School, and they all tell you the same thing, right? They're in buildings that need to be rebuilt, and it's $1 billion worth of needs. So for you to ask me, can I give you assurance that every kid is getting an equal experience in a facility? I cannot give you that assurance in Virginia Beach. There's just no way I can give you that assurance in Virginia Beach, because we have children in unequal facilities across the city based on when they were built. And that's going to continue to be the case, whether or not the school board sees this as an absolute priority. I think I'd have to turn it over to Mr. Edwards and Ms. Anderson. Mr. Edwards is the chair of that committee, because this was a long conversation with them. And the school board did vote to affirm this request, so it is my sense it is the school board's priority. But Mr. Edwards, if you'd like to speak to it.
Well, I think also in looking as a city council member, we sat here last week and we looked at the possibility of doing a referendum for flooding. And we looked at what the tax increases have to be for that. I think we also, at the same track, need to be looking at this question of the school replacement and how we're going to fund that, because when we're talking to our taxpayers who've got to pay the bill, we've got to tell them the whole story. We can't tell them piecemeal. And I think we've really got to come up with how we're going to provide reasonably, and I know we can't do it overnight for all of these schools, reasonably how we can provide and it be something that is going to be satisfactory to our debt limit and that our taxpayers can afford.
Well,
And it's going to be a big thing. And so I think when we are explaining to our taxpayers why they need to come up with additional money, every decision we make, we better have a very good answer for. And that's why I'm looking to know for sure, if we put this $13 million on this project, that is the top priority in all of this other.
you want to speak to that, Mr. Edwards?
Just briefly,
Could you go to the podium, Dan?
It is our priority, and, you know, I know I don't need to sell, you've already collectively indicated that you understand the worth of the program, but it does address the needs of some of the most neediest students in the community, and I think we may be overlooking the fact that we are leveraging through this program an additional $1.5 million to $2 million plus from the private sector, which comes in to help these students. And that not only helps those students, but we are also providing a model that we are replicating through other partnerships elsewhere in the community. And as I say, the Joint Committee studied it and determined that this was a feasible method that would work. Alaskan Road Annex, which you recently mentioned, it would not work. That we cannot put students in there for short of it's like $20 or $30 million. Students, period. So that's that had been an option that we looked at, and it just that was not feasible. But as I say, we studied. It was more than a year and a half in looking at different options.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Rosemary, then John, and then Sabrina.
So the students at Achievable Dream, they're all there voluntarily, is that
That's
right?
correct.
So, I mean, even though 40% could be identified for that program, they have to want to come there and agree to be transferred from a further point than their home school. And I remember when we were having those discussions, are we going to be able to meet the need of the numbers? And I think you excelled at it, isn't that right, Lee?
Yes, we exceeded the first deadline and the first minimum number that was set. And I do want to add that the numbers that are in the memorandum of agreement, that 360 is the minimum number that we would be hoping to educate. We hope that we would exceed those numbers.
It says here maximum, so you might want to go back and check that.
Okay.
So were students denied the opportunity that qualified?
I'm sorry?
because it's voluntary and you had to have people, the students want to come voluntarily. Were
This,
there any-
we had, no, we,
Everybody was accepted?
we
that-
accepted everyone that applied this last year. Now, there will be, this upcoming year, that will not be the case because we are getting to the numbers in some grade levels that we could not accommodate them all. But as of this year, we accepted every single child that applied to the program within those 23 zones.
And I do want to applaud y'all on the board for selling underutilized property to put it into the needs of the school system. That's, you did the Price Street Annex, and now you're gonna do Laskin Road, and so you really are chiseling down to get rid of some of the stuff to put into your program and to be fiscally responsible of that. So I think that's really a good thing. And that Laskin Road, and I think a lot of us were here when that school had to be closed for school because of Oceana and the crash zone. And so I'm not sure how the public would have felt too, to put a school back on the property of a school we had to close. So I think that, at least when I was sitting there, that was, important to me as well. But thank you for what you've been doing.
Okay, John, then Sabrina.
I want to come back to this issue of
Then Barbara.
financial management, because obviously, when you have to confiscate the revenues, your perspective is much different than we just spend them. But since 80% of the American families can't even come up with $400 in a month for an emergency, they have no reserve. So let's just go back and look at the history of the reserves, if you would. In the 2018-19 budget, we carried over $7.9 million, $7.8 million. That was the same year, the year that closed out, that would have been that year we closed out, 17-18, that we raised the real estate tax rate 1.25%, raising $6.6 million, and you ended up with the surplus in that very same year that you carried over into 18-19 of 7.8. So clearly a tax increase wasn't needed. Clearly that took money out of the economy. Clearly that was a tax on people at the poorest end of our range who didn't have any margin. So we carried that over into the 18-19 budget. That was $7,837,731. So now when you look at the categories where the reversion funds were deposited, one example was technology. So you added a $1.5 million into the base, and guess what? At the end of the year, guess what the surplus was? $1,505,152. So we could have bought a lot of whiteboards for $1,540. Obviously, we had this big backlog, but clearly we didn't spend it on that. Now, the other area which consistently we under-execute is personnel. That was $12.1 million. You carried over $587,000. At the end of the year, you had them all up, $19,057,861. Some of the categories were 5% under, some categories were 4.3% under, some categories were 2.8% under. But the point is, it's a consistent pattern of under-execution of salaries, which means either one, we have lots of vacancies, which probably in classrooms isn't true because the teacher's got to be there or a substitute's got to be there. Or it could be that your budgeted salary is higher than your executed salary, lots of explanations. But nonetheless, there is money at the end, which we, over this 5-year period, was almost $100 million. That goes a long way to CIPs. I think that's some of the points that we've made is where are we putting the money? So now we go borrow money. That's much more expensive than cash. But there is a repeated, and you can say, what if it was just a 1% margin? Who deserves more of a margin? Working families or school systems or city council? And I criticize our own budget too, as you well know. I don't choose, there's no favorites. Because this is money that belongs to people that we confiscated. And at the end, we didn't use it. So it means it had a depressing effect on the economy, and it didn't do anything in your hands because it didn't get spent. So there is an economic consequence of overtaxation. So then we come back and we look now in this year. So when you go back and look at this 19 million, and right, there was $3 million of additional real estate tax revenue, which was unanticipated. That's recurring revenue. That goes a long way to that $4.9 million of kindergarten expense, because that's a recurring new revenue. And then you had some prepaids and some revenue. So on top of that 19 million, which was what we carried over to this budget, which is 20, it's a growth of $7 million. A lot of it, as you mentioned, was the $8 million new money, $3 million of which was real estate. So I think it can be said that there's an opportunity cost. And if you took more risk to be leaner on your side, which I think we should always take risk on the government side so that families don't have to, but it is a philosophical question of who do you think has the biggest need for margin? Families who are stressed, or school system who and the city as well, who consistently ends with substantial under-executed things, and then we don't use it for what we think, whether it's flooding on our side or capital projects on your side. These are strong questions, because I can tell you that flooding is a higher priority than most school modernization. I'd rather a kid go home to a dry house than to a wet house because he's got a $65 million better school. I mean, these are the choices. And the families can't pay both those bills. They just can't. I think that's Mrs. Henry's point is we have a limited fiscal capacity in our community. And we always talk about, our teachers and how they work hard. They do, because unlike police and firefighters, they're professionals by Department of Labor, so therefore they don't qualify for overtime, as you all well know, and they work a lot of hours, over 8 hours a day. I know Ms. Anderson's a former teacher, knows that's true. But when we had these, did we recognize any of these teachers with bonus? Because they're the people that's under executed labor. They're picking up the slack. They're doing the work. Maybe we should. That's your call. And I'm not saying that's what it should be, but I'm just telling you, when you get out into the community where people are financially struggling and you have $26 million and we have a lot of capital needs, it's hard for people to understand. That's why I'm asking for the empirical analysis. I assume Achievable Green nowhere in the country is co-located with the high school.
I'm sorry? We are only in the state of Virginia. We are in Newport News,
And here
Virginia Beach, and Henrico.
And are they co-located there?
We are only K4 in Henrico. We are adding a grade level each year. But no, it will not be starting in 2 years.
Okay. Well, I do think Mrs. Henley's on the right track when she's saying, is this the highest priority? Because you have to answer the public just like we do. And I do know how to send my emails to the people who made the decisions. But I am not convinced on what we've received to date. I am disappointed that we didn't get these things in time to read and digest them over the weekend like the rest of our packet and really represent the public that we serve. But there's a different perspective on a body that has to confiscate the revenue and has to make the choices, and we just can't be an advocate for a single industry or a single part of the budget. I applaud you. You should be the strongest advocate for your side of the equation as you can, just like the police chief is and the sheriff is. But that's not a luxury we have. And I think that there is opportunities, as well as you do on your per student cost, that we can lean at. And we have to look at, when we say these capital improvements, and I think Betty F. Williams is a classic example. Anyone who drives down Newtown Road and goes through there, we broke the school up into 3. You remember that? We built 2 brand new schools to build that campus, but that last school really, and then when we put the 6th graders at the old Aragon Elementary School, when we said it wasn't good enough for the gifted people, but it was good enough for the 6th graders, and we haven't done anything with it since. But there's another place we need to think about. That's another part, and I look forward to the narrative that you're going to provide that explains to the public why those are acceptable choices, because I don't know how well that's going to go over.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina, and then Barbara.
First off, let me thank you, Dr. Spence, for succinctly laying the foundation for Reversion Funds, providing the details for the budget requests for this particular resolution. I really do appreciate that. And they do appear and sound to me like essential needs for our students to continue to be successful. So I do appreciate that. I do apologize, too, because several of the school board members, from what I understand, and staff were trying to get in last Tuesday and were not able to. We do recognize that, and we appreciate you coming today to clarify questions for the body. I also want to say, I know that there have been cuts, 2008, 2009, 2010, and those cuts have not been accounted for. And so that is an issue that we actually should look at. And I understand that the school board has been doing its best to grapple with those cuts, though that those cuts have not been reimbursed, for a lack of a better term. So I appreciate what you all are doing for our school, for our children, for our community. We appreciate that. If I could also say, Dr. Freeland, could you stand? Last week, there were a lot of wonderful comments made about Achievable Dream, and I echo those sentiments. Thank you for what you're doing, for what your staff is doing. I have been to the school. I've sat down and talked to the principal about your program, so I know what you're doing works. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. I understand, too, that the board is here. Would you like to recognize the board?
Absolutely, because we could not do it without them. Charles Barker, who is the chair of the Virginia Beach Board, Jay Klebanoff, who is the vice chair, and Joan Berlin, who is a board member, and Purvis Blake, who spoke last week, is the vice president of academics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, would you like to share just some of the things that your board and what you're doing with your board to contribute as well to the Achievable Dream? What are the kind of activities that you, and I think you have an event that's coming up as well.
We do. So, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity. So our board raises, right now with K through 7, we raise $1.9 million a year to add to the add funds for the additional programs that we provide through an Achievable Dream. Some of those things include extended day. As you know, many of our students come to school starting in kindergarten behind grade level, in some cases up to 2 years. We have this additional time through extended day, year-round, and Saturday school to provide that extended learning time. We take over 100 field trips a year. Why do we do that? It is to provide them with the exposure. Basically, as Mr. Edwards said, it is our opportunity to level the playing field for all children. For those students who may not have the opportunity to have those experiences without the partnership that we have, without our board going out and raising money every single day, our students would not have these opportunities to do these things. We spend probably $45,000 a year right now in food to supplement them getting 2 meals a day through the school division. Right now, we have packed 158 food baskets to go home. A lot of that comes from our own funds. So we are raising $2,500 to $3,000 per child. By the time that we fully reach K-12, it will be over 2.5 million, 2.7 million for us to implement this program. That does not include the scholarship funds that are raised in addition. Each year, our students get a $3,000 scholarship from an Achievable Dream through a sponsor that provides those funds for us. We also have college partnerships with UVA, Virginia Tech, ODU, Norfolk State, CNU, and I think we're signing one with with VCU this week, to ensure that the financial gap is closed for our students. So I share that with you to say that this program is not about K-5, 6, 7, or even through 12th grade. This program is to benefit our students for many years to come and ensure that that gap is closed for them past high school as well when they're in college. And yes, we do have an event coming up, A Night to Dream, on February 7th at the Cavalier Hotel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Henley?
It's unfortunate that this has become an Achievable Dream issue. I mean, it's a wonderful program, and I don't think anybody here is saying we shouldn't have it. I just want to make sure we're doing everything else we need to do as well, and that we can continue to do these other things for all of the other students that we have to be concerned with too. And I think you all are doing a great job. And I want you to succeed, and I want you to be in Virginia Beach, and it's great, and I'm glad I finally got a chance to read the Memorandum of Agreement. Unfortunately, we had just not seen that. But anyway, going back to these meetings we've had with the school board, and when you all have sat there and told us, now don't forget, we've got $1 billion worth of needs, it's stuck, and that's what I'm concerned about. And I think when we're looking at doing the flooding with a referendum, it's very possible that we might want to talk about some school board referendum as well. And I just would like for the school board to come ready to a meeting with us as to how we can reasonably begin to tackle some of these other schools. As I said, looking at Betty F. Williams and knowing the background of that area over there, and the demographic is very similar to what we're talking about here from the eastern part of the city, 10 years getting that constructed, to me, is not satisfactory. And we've got to come up with some way to deal with these other needs as well. And I hope we can have, so that as we're talking about what we're going to do with our bond rating, with our bond debt, with our metrics that we might be having to change, I think we really have to look at the schools as well as the flooding. And I'm looking at the last one on this list, White Oaks, not being completed with the construction until, I guess this is 2102. That's 90 years from now. That's not satisfactory. We can't do this. But if we go out to the public with a referendum, are they going to be satisfied that we have been spending the money in the best fashion? That's the only way we'll get a referendum approved.
So if I may just speak to that for a second, if it's okay. So I mean, I agree with you, and I think you've heard the chairwoman ask twice now for a joint meeting to discuss this construction conversation, right? You have $2 billion in discussed needs for stormwater in the city. And the referendum conversation has been about stormwater. But that is not the only priority you have for construction in the city. You've got a number of other CIP projects on the books. You've got road projects. You've got building projects on the books. And this is the challenge we're talking about. And so you're essentially making the same case for the challenge that the school board faces, that the city faces, which are, you do have to prioritize, but building one thing doesn't mean you don't prioritize the other things. It means that you're trying to figure out how to accomplish multiple objectives with the funds and revenues that are available to you. And I think in this scenario, it's important to remember that the school board of the city of Virginia Beach has a commitment to the Achievable Dream Academy that it's had for the last 7 years. And that is a part of that commitment that it will provide this facility, which is why it remains a priority. And I can assure you that over that year and a half of conversation, and I think you can hear that from members who are on the committee, that they talked about, is this the top priority? Do we need to make sure that this happens, given that we've got $1 billion in other school construction needs? And I think that what came out of that was an affirmation by the school board, by its vote, to say, yes, it's a priority, put it on the resolution. I think that ought to be the message you take from a resolution from the school board, that the school board, by its vote, is affirming these are our priorities, and that they have given it sufficient study, and then they're not doing it capriciously, that they understand. I think we all understand the needs that the city has and the needs that the school division has. If I could snap my fingers and build 3 high schools tomorrow, I'd do it, because Bayside High School, First Colonial High School, and Kempsville High School all need to be knocked to the ground and rebuilt. And that was really what our long-range facilities plan came back. The community wants us to build high schools first. They want us to take care of those 3 high schools in Princess Anne High School first. And so that was what we shared with you all last year in the long-range facility study. So there are incredible needs, and saying that this is a need doesn't mean we're not prioritizing other needs. And I just think that needs to be something that we remember in conversation about our school board, because they deliberated on this matter extensively.
Okay, Rosemary, then Michael.
So the last few months, when being questioned on what were the greatest needs of the city that we were facing, I always said it was infrastructure. Between the flooding and sea level rise on the city side and aging school buildings. In fact, I did a op-ed on this issue. And I did bring up at the 5-year forecast that we've been talking about it. Maybe it's time that we actually start to do something about it. So I think it's very clear in our minds that we've really got to, we can't keep kicking this can down the road. I do have another question though. So we had all but 3 schools with the all-day kindergarten because they were under construction.
Yes, ma'am.
So will they be ready for next year? And then what additional money is it going to cost to get them up and running?
Yeah. So the answer to will they be ready next year is we certainly think so. They are under construction, and you know that can be delayed depending on weather and those things. But right now I've got assurances from my chief operations officer and his team that we're on schedule to be ready for next year with that construction. $600,000 to complete the kindergarten implementation for those remaining schools. The reversion request now gets us through this year, and we will be trying to build into our operating budget the kindergarten, again, based on, as was noted by Councilman Moss, some of the new revenues that came in over budget, and we'll be able to look at that and place that towards that. Now, remember, as is always the case, and as several of you have noted, there are other competing priorities for the school board. First amongst them is compensation. So that'll be part of our conversation as we head into our budget deliberations. But just, understanding those are some of the competing challenges that we have to deal with.
We can't leave those, my little 2-year-old granddaughter says, don't leave me behind, don't leave me behind, and we can't leave those 3 schools behind.
I would like to just make one last comment about vacancies and budgeting at vacancies and the difficulty with that for us. So in school divisions, it's a little bit different when you don't have a position. We allocate out FTE to our schools based on what we understand to be the number of students we'll be serving and the class size that we'll be trying to keep. And so sometimes you'll hear the school board talk about in its budget deliberations the reduction of class size, and that means adding FTE above and beyond the normal FTE in order to try to bring class size down. For example, it's been a priority for them for the last several years at the high school level. When those things happen, we allocate out positions to our schools. So if I'm a high school principal, I get an allocation of 150 teachers to try to build a master schedule. I build that master schedule around that allocation. I do the same thing at the elementary school. I get 40 teachers, I build my master schedule around that allocation. And I understand in the 3rd grade, I might have 4 third grade teachers, and I'm going to build it out to try to keep each of them at 25 students. And so I'm going to have, there's 100 students in 3rd grade. And if we were to not budget for that position, if we were to assume some level of vacancy and not budget for that, I couldn't hand that allocation to that principal to hire. If I can't hand that to them, they're going to have 3 teachers at 3rd grade. If they have 3 teachers at 3rd grade, they're not 33 students per class. So it's a little bit more complicated in the school budgeting to think about how we deal with FTE, because they're generally, the FTE, at least in the instructional positions, which is the bulk of our positions, are allocated on a per pupil basis, and we're trying to keep class sizes and services provided to students at a manageable number. Same thing you could say for counselors. We have 350 counselors per student, for example, in our secondary schools. If you were to try to not allocate a counselor position based on trying to be conservative in your budgeting with those FTEs, you would end up with 1 fewer counselor, and you'd have to figure out in which high school did you have 1 fewer counselor, and that would increase rather dramatically in that circumstance the number of students that counselor would have to serve. So it's a complicating factor that I just hope the city council will remember when we talk about vacancies and how we look at and deal with FTE in the school board budget.
Thank you. Michael?
I want to thank you all for being here and apologize for being just a few minutes late. I had another appointment that ran a little bit long, and so I missed a little bit of the beginning of the presentation. I appreciate Council Member Wilson's question about kindergarten, and I'm wondering, was there any discussion before I arrived about the whiteboard replacements? There was.
I had a brief discussion. My comments are in your packet for the record, but the short version was it's a $14.5 million project. We've gotten about $5 million into that project. We're building our operating budget to get to about a $3.5 million cycle on that so that we can replace those on a regular basis. Because 10 years ago, we used stimulus dollars to put all of those into our schools at one time, and those parts are no longer available to replace and repair those whiteboards.
I just think if you had any additional comments about how classrooms have modernized since many of us were in a classroom, and what essential tools technology like the whiteboard can be in a learning environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was that discussed before I arrived?
We didn't get into it at that level. I can talk briefly. I can say, when I was a high school principal, I was a high school principal for 8 years, and in the first years of my being a high school principal, I used to get people in the room. We were making the case for bringing technology into the classroom. And I used to raise my hand in the audience, and I'd say, how many of you have interacted with technology today to solve a problem? And it was not very many people at that time. I'm probably dating myself when I started being a high school principal. If you ask that question today, everybody raises their hand, right? So how many of you have used technology today to solve a problem? And so we have an obligation in our schools to sort of adapt to our times. We have an obligation to help students understand how to leverage the tools that are available to them through technologies to solve problems, to communicate, to create, to collaborate with one another, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom in the world. I saw an incredible Safari a couple days ago. It was in a classroom, and they were on safari with some folks in South Africa, and the people driving the Jeep were calling the kids by name, and they were talking to them about their questions and what they were saying. I mean, just some incredible opportunities that exist that didn't used to exist. And so we've been bringing, in a very thoughtful and phased way, technology into our classrooms to the point where we now have wide-scale access to the technologies that our teachers think and that we think we need in order to prepare kids for the future.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Oh, sorry, I just had
Okay.
another point that's on a different topic. You know, there's quite a bit of discussion here about budget practices and about making priorities, which I think are extremely valid points, and something that all of us have an obligation, no doubt, to keep at the top of mind. And yet, it's been presented that may be in some ways in conflict with the discussion we're having about Achievable Dream, and I agree. I regret that. I regret that we have found ourselves in that situation. But we also have an obligation and a responsibility to our community's most underserved young people, and we have an obligation to the people we have the privilege to represent to be innovative and responsive to the needs of our community, and as well to incorporate the private sector investment and stakeholder buy-in that's clearly a core component of Achievable Dreams practice. And I take that very seriously. I appreciate it very much, and I also want to just take this opportunity to point out the value that I see in for the young people who are enrolled in the program, and the impact that it can have on that this program does have on their lives, and I think it's worth noting and worth stating time and time again that we do have a very serious obligation to make sure that opportunities are available, the best and brightest opportunities are available to everyone in our community, especially those who may not have the privilege of some of the opportunities that many of us did have when we were growing up. And so for the young people who are enrolled in this program, the impact is transformative. And I think it's transformative also for those in the community who are participate in the program. I've visited the school several times, and I always got that sense it's equally transformative for those who are around the program. And I think that's just worth stating that that's another obligation we have as a body and as a community to those young people.
Thank you. Barbara?
Just a comment. In preparation for this meeting, I hope we're going to have soon with the school board, with your recommendations. You all are used to this and you do deal with it all the time, whereas maybe we don't have the background that you have. But understanding things such as what you rate as your building capacity and so forth. I'm just looking at this chart here, which is the long-range facility master plan campus information as of 2017, so it's a little outdated. We need to have that updated now. But I don't understand, for example, I remember when Bird Neck Elementary was built, it was built as a double school, a very big elementary school, and at the same time, or a couple of years later, Glenwood Elementary was also built as a double school. But looking at the two schools, and they're similar in size, Bird Neck Elementary is rated as having an optimum capacity of 787, whereas Glenwood has an optimum capacity of 1,053. Somehow or other, a school just about the same size is rated with the capacity for 300 more students. There's got to be a reason for that.
There are. Yeah.
So when you come to us with your concerns and so forth, things like this, we really need to understand. You know, when I look at Bird Neck having a 31% under capacity, or other schools, and I'm glad to see that most of the schools have some under capacity. We've been through that time when everybody was over capacity and we had portable units. We certainly don't want to do that again. But really, there are a lot of things that you all deal with that we would need to know. And, you know, I'm still hung up on Betty F. Williams not getting done for 10 years and why that should be in the same category as some of these other schools, when I've heard even way down county how bad that is in need of work. So we need to understand a lot of this that maybe you all deal with on a regular basis if we're going to really address this. And I appreciate all the information you could give us.
Yes, ma'am. We would welcome the opportunity to do a joint workshop with you all on our facilities and have that conversation. There are certainly reasons. A lot of it is about core space, and capacity is an interesting thing to determine. It's a lot of times determined as if you used every nook and cranny of every available space all day. And so you may or may not do that because a lot of rooms get used for a lot of different purposes in our buildings, as you might imagine. We can have that conversation. We would look forward to it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I just want to thank you all for coming, but I would like to say I think it was prudent that we delayed a week. Obviously, there was a logistic challenge getting, the subject matter experts into the building last week. But I think that this conversation was fruitful in a lot of ways where, there was an articulation that we both bodies have our sense of priorities going forward with limited resources to accommodate. And I think, but once again, I think through conversation and collaboration, we can get mutual understanding a lot better. As the council ourselves tries to improve our budget process, and I think that we, you being, better part of 50% of our budget and priority going forward, that, further collaboration and sitting in the table and having these type of conversations. Most important thing, that one of the most important priorities of this body is the budget process. And, but once again, being strained, going forward. And, let me just say that the secret ultimately, because we got billions of dollars worth of obligations, not only in stormwater, with other infrastructure. We're an aging city in terms of infrastructure and people. School boards have, from what I recall, one of the workshops that we did, about a $3 billion need overall, for modernization, replacement, and other CIP projects. The ultimate answer is going to be in economic development, bringing in new sources of revenue. But that being said, that we also have to appreciate that the schools are an economic engine, why people want to come here, why businesses want to come here. But it's also public safety and a whole myriad of other things that we do. So as we go forward with these challenges, I think if we did them more collaboratively and together going forward, not only through the budget process, but throughout the year, I think that would be prudent. But thank you all very much. Appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you.
All right.
So Mayor, moving on, Alice Kelly and her staff will be in, and they'll get set up to give us a report on the comprehensive annual financial report, otherwise known as a CAFR, for fiscal 2019.
Hey, look forward to it.
And I believe this is a required briefing that has to be done by the end of the year, so we're just getting it in the
Made it
last
right in the
meeting.
nick of time, didn't we?
That's not as important as national security, that's all I know.
Thank you, Fair.
When I came in, there's tons of people waiting.
I really like this.
The statistical section is much shorter.
Well, we brought everybody. It's not a party unless everybody comes, right?
The statistical section is much briefer. All righty, because I'm looking at our schedule and we want to finish in time to get into our executive session, I'll start, and the mayor, I'm sure, will be here.
Sure.
So I'd like to introduce Alice Kelly, our Director of Finance, and then Alice, you need to introduce a couple of your dignitaries.
Sure. As the city manager said, this is a required briefing that by state code, we are required by November 30th to present a comprehensive annual financial report, which is our audited financial statements. We are also required to submit a comparative cost transmittal, and we are also required to submit by December 30th a letter from our mayor saying that we briefed council on the results of our audit. So I'd like to introduce Aries Coleman, who's our engagement director from Clifton Lawson Allen, CLA, and she's going to do her required communications to the council regarding the audit. Thank you very much. In regards to the slide, would you just, okay, thank you. Next slide. That's just the agenda. Okay, there we are. Okay, great. Thank you very much for allowing me to present to you today. As Ms. Kelly stated, that the city is required for us, to the independent auditor for the city, to present the results of the comprehensive annual financial report, which I will call CAFR, throughout my presentation. All right. So when you look at the CAFR, you got a copy. It's like 390 pages, a lot of information in there. The city finance team has done a wonderful job. I want to kind of give you an idea of what we do. So the actual financial statements are the city's. The city finance team, as well as other persons throughout the city, help them to pull this information together for presentation. What we do as an auditing firm is that we take that information and we apply certain tests and reasonableness and some kind of other logistics in the CPA world, and we determine whether or not the financial statements are presented in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. I'll say GAAP sometimes. So for the 2019 CAFR, the auditor opinion we gave was unmodified. That is the highest level of assurance that we can give on a financial statements. So unmodified means it's the opinion that was issued from standards. There's been no changes. Everything that we have looked at as far as related to the CAFR was reasonably stated, and there were no material changes that were required by us. We also issue a report on internal controls over financial reporting and compliance and other matters based on an audited financial statements performed in accordance with GAS. That's a lot of words, and basically that is requirements under Yellow Book. Because the city receives financial funding and you spend more than $750 for financial expenditures under federal funds, you're required to have an audit in accordance with GAS. And that's what this long worded report relates to. And what that requires us to do is look at your internal controls. And we look at the internal controls, again, for reasonableness, to make sure that they are adequate to support the underlying information in the financial statements. So when we did that, we determined whether or not we have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. That means, was there anything that we needed to comment on? And there was nothing. So again, we can say there were no issues. What we say is basically the test that we applied to this information. There were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, which means it was unmodified. Next slide. All right. So we also look at, I mentioned your federal funding, which is the reason why you have a GAS audit. We also had issued a report, a compliance report on your major federal programs, the internal controls, and the schedule of expenditures for federal awards, which we call CFA, which is required under uniform guidance. And uniform guidance used to be called A133. Back in 2014, is now called uniform guidance. And we looked at seven programs this year. In of those 7 programs, we did have some findings. One finding was Title I program, which is done at the school system. And Title I is required to do an allocation schedule to determine how the funding is allocated between the Title I schools. And when we look at the schedule, we'll make sure, again, it's reasonably stated and underlying documentation supports the schedule. There was an error. Some of the data that was supposed to be transferred onto the allocation worksheet was incorrect in accordance with the underlying data. When we did the reallocation, the allocation did not change to the schools, but however, again, they're supposed to have internal controls to ensure this information is accurate. And it did not cause any kind of changes to the allocation, but if you do not have proper internal controls, you could have a situation as such. We also looked at the Section 8 voucher program. And this program was looked at last year in 2018. And in 2018, the program was actually, it was modified, it was qualified, which means we were required to look at it again for 2019. So we audited the program again. And the rent reasonableness finding, which we had for 2018, it was repeated for 2019, but there was a difference. The difference was that we had, the findings had significantly reduced for 2019, as well as the department had implemented the corrective action plan starting in December of 18 and moving forward. So when you really think about a finding, it's almost repeated 2 years, because by the time you get the finding, which is in November of 2018, you almost half the year of doing something the way that we said that before your implementation plan, was implemented. So this year, although a finding was noted, we had one that was in 2019 for new tenants, and one is in 2019 for existing tenants, that the rent reasonableness under HUD is supposed to be done before the contract date, and it was not. However, for this year, the program was not qualified. It was unmodified. Significant deficiencies were implemented, and we also gave credit to the department for the implementation process. It's just a matter of time for the implementation process to fully go through the program. The last finding is APA requirements, which the state's auditors are required us to do. Set of procedures that really have no rhyme or reason. They just kind of under the APA guidance that we must apply to different areas that they have in this guidance that we're required to do. One of the areas we look at is over in the Department of Social Services is computer access, and is more so for terminated employees. So under APA guidance, if a person is terminated or decides to leave in part from the city, their access to the computers or system must be done within 3 days. It's 3 days. It's not a 3 day and a weekend. It just says 3 days. So when we looked at this, we had some persons who left the DSS, and their access was not terminated within the 3 day time frame. So again, we do not get a wavering as to what the reason was. APA is usually a yes or no, and these were reported. And if APA required to follow up, they will contact the city and get any information they need to follow up on these items. All right, some required communications that I must make as part as the auditor in the audit process. We talked about the financial statements. The financial statements we have a lot of numbers in there that the city has provided. You also have some estimates. And what estimates is they're not really a hard-coded number. You couldn't actually point to a specific line item and then another document and say, this is the exact number. And when we look at it, think about your pension costs and your OPEB costs. They're done by actuarial evaluations. So they're estimating what that liability should be. When you look at your fixed assets, depreciation, we assume that a truck will last 10 years, but you really don't know, depending on how that truck is used, the maintenance and so forth. So that's an estimate as well. The city, if you have any kind of self-insurance, that, again, you're estimating what your IBNR will relate to that. The financial disclosures that are in the financial statements, we do make sure that they are accurate in accordance with the financial statements that are presented in front of them. And there's one quick thing I want to mention. It's a lot of information when you look at the financial statements, and you have notes, you have MD&A, you have statistical tables. What I always tell persons, especially newly readers of a financial statements, your MD&A, which is your management discussion and analysis, that's in front of the financial statements. That and then the notes will come behind it are really probably the best place to get an idea of what everything that's going on. It gives you kind of an easy read. It tells you how the numbers relate to kind of layman's terms and what's going on. We look at the financial schedules. I think we like them as auditors because it's kind of one-stop shop. But I would say your MD&A and your disclosures are probably the best place to look. During the audit, we did not encounter any difficulties with management. There were no disagreements. We did not have any corrected or uncorrected misstatements that we brought to management, and management decided not to make them. Management did give us representation, which meant that they said all the information they provided to us or allowed us to access was accurate and fairly misstated as far as their knowledge. Fairly stated. It was fairly stated in accordance with their knowledge. Management did not consult with any other independent accountants. For the audit, for the group audits, which is going to be you have the schools, which is part of the group audit. You also have CDC. We do an audit for Overdevelopment Authority. So these are part of the group related to the city. There were no issues there, and management gave representation that they have they have more control. They have control or relationship with these group audits to make sure their financial statements are in conformity with the cities. Other information that's in the CAFR is required supplemental information, which is your RSI, supplemental information, and then your scheduled expenditures of federal awards, which we'll call the CFA. These items are in relation to your financial statements, and they provide additional information that's required under auditing standards to be presented. So again, thank you very much, and I'm done. Any questions?
Hey, any questions? John?
I noticed the statistical section had less data than in the past, and I assume that we provide that data. That's in the statistical section, because in the past, we've had people in there, people on food stamps, and other kind of data has been in the statistical section of this
didn't
report.
knowingly-
I
did
think
we
if you go
knowingly
back
cut
and look at
anything
some of the prior ones, you'll notice that there's more data than is in this one. I was just curious.
I thought we added some more things in there, actually, so, we can go back and compare, maybe we changed things out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So, I wanted to thank Aries and the CLA. They were wonderful auditors to work with. Our internal auditor, Lyndon and Gretchen Hudom, I hope I said that right, is here representing the city auditor. They obviously work with us. I brought my whole staff, Tom had mentioned it, because they are really very hardworking and they're excellent financial staff. We've also been working on our new ERP implementation, so to do both of those at the same time really takes an effort. And so I wanted to particularly recognize Miriam Woodson, our principal accountant, and Kevin Kilbasa, our accountant four, who really lead the team. And I also wanted to introduce Wendy, who is our new city controller. She just started with the city last week. And we have, 400 pages worth, chock full of information in the CAFR, and it's excellent novel to read. It's not a novel, it's a nonfiction. It's excellent information. So what we tried to do is glean out some important information for the council to understand and know about. And so if you go to the next slide. There's two main numbers that we talk about in a financial statement. Net position, and net position is our total economic resources. It's a useful indicator of our government financial position. It's similar to a citizen trying to go to buy a house. You want to know what your assets and your liabilities are and how much money you can borrow for a house. But then we also have what's called fund balance, and that's our current current financial resources. It's our near-term accountability. It's budgetary compliance, our legal compliance. It's basically what you have to spend next month or next year to be able to do operations. And so typically, most people tend to look at the next month's rent or the next month's mortgage. Similarly, in the government, you usually look at the fund balance. How much can I spend next year? But net position is also as important as fund balance. Next slide. So our statement of net position is the first exhibit in the financial statements, and net position increased about $139 million last year. However, the unrestricted net position went down because we cash financed some CIP, and so that mix changed even though we went up in total. The next slide is our primary governmental expenditures, and as you can see, education is a major chunk, but then public works and utilities and human services also are have a large percentage of the pie, and this is Exhibit 2 in the CAFR. Our general fund budget to actual for FY 2019, our unassigned fund balance is $121.3 million, or 10.18% of 2020 revenues, and it's about $7 million more than FY 2018. Our fund balance reservation, our total fund balance was $230 million. We had some reservations and inventories and loan receivables, and totaling $109 million, and so 121 of that is our savings, if you will. Next slide. Our total revenues for our general fund, we were very, very close to budget. The green numbers exceed budget, the red were under budget, and the blue they were under budget, but they exceeded the prior fiscal year. In total, we were 0.1% different in our revenues than last year, or than our budget, excuse me. For our total expenditures for the general fund, as you can see, the transfers to schools was the highest expenditure, next salary, then operating expenditures and fringe benefits. Our unassigned general fund balance has, over the past 10 years, has hovered around 10%, which is right in between our council policy from 8 to 12%, and it's a nice, healthy fund balance for the city to have. Our school operating budget, we talked about that just a little bit ago, it's $26.8 million. Our enterprise funds, we have different enterprise funds for the city: water, sewer, stormwater, waste management, and parking. They're all in a healthy net position. The next slide, the enterprise funds for water and sewer, I wanted to point out the Lake Gaston water payment was $20 million, and that caused a negative change in net position. That was the biggest factor in that particular fund. Our development authority, the capital contributions was a $23 million non-cash transfer to the Housing Resource Center. That was the largest thing that happened in that particular fund this year. Our TIP and our TAP funds had the change in fund balance for the tourist investment program of 7.3 and the tourist advertising program of negative 0.3 million. And then I wanted to just spend a brief minute on the long-term debt summary. Our bonds payable went down from FY18 to FY19 from 1.2 was about $50 million reduction. Our net pension liability went down, and our OPEB liability went up slightly. Our OPEB liability, we changed our discount rate from 7% to 6.5, and that liability went up. And so Ari was talking about change in estimates. This is a change in estimate, and it increased our liability. VRS has not decreased this year. It will decrease next year from 7% to 6.75. So our net pension liability will go up, as well as the amount we need to contribute to VRS, as David Bradley had mentioned in a previous presentation. And so these are our annual payments by fiscal year. Last year in FY 2018, we paid $293 million to long-term liabilities, and this year it was $299 million. Outstanding debt by purpose, most of it is for general government, 24% is for school, and then we have utilities and stormwater making the other two large percentage of the debt. Wanted to point out the net pension liabilities. This does not include the 6.75 reduction for VRS, but what it shows is the red is the amortized or the unfunded liability. So every year we pay a portion of our unfunded liability, and then the green is our normal cost. And so the black line is our liability going down. So over the course of about 25 more years, that'll be down to zero. It's a good healthy way of reducing your unfunded liability without taking a big hit in 1 year. And the same thing with schools. The schools are going down the same way. And then our OPEB health insurance goes the same way. That's where you pay a portion of it to go down. Wanted to also talk about our PAFR, which is our Popular Annual Financial Report. We did this for the first time last year. We are working with our communications department to develop another one, and we should have one out by the end of the calendar year, by December 31st. And a PAFR is the Popular Annual Financial. It takes the information from the CAFR and makes it more citizen accessible. CAFR is really designed for very sophisticated financial readers, bond investors, people that utilize numbers. A PAFR will take the CAFR numbers and make it a little bit less technical and maybe a little less information, but a little bit easier to read. It's about 20 pages. And so we'll have that out and distribute that to the council in the next few weeks. So the summary for FY19, we have a fund balance of $121 million, which is within our city council policy. Our net debt is $1.15 million. Our pension liabilities are $956.8 million, and our OPEB liabilities are $285 million. All right, and so I'm going to go into an interim financial report for FY20. So that was FY19 year end.
Okay, Mr. Jones has a question?
Sure.
Back to the pension liability, who arrives at the discount rate? Do you do it, or does the
No,
VRS?
VRS is our plan, and VRS decides that. They have a board. They just made,
Basis of that discount rate?
they typically have, they had a big study done to determine the investment returns, and they had a presentation to their board about a month ago, 2 months ago, and they determined that 7% was probably a little high.
So that is an accurate discount rate?
6.75 is a little bit lower. They, VRS is, I think, the 14th largest pension system in the country. That includes corporate and public. And so it's a very large pension system, and it's very conservative in its investment strategies. And so the 7%, they determined that probably they're more likely to make a 6.25 over the long term.
That might be optimistic in the near term, given the investment.
Well, near
given
term,
the
but
Given the investments they can make,
sure.
and if you look at 10-year treasury, 1.7, 20-year, look at these rates and the kind of yields you're getting on quote-unquote pension fund safe investments. If they can get 6.25, they're doing very well.
That's why I asked the question.
Sure.
of course.
You know, they also weigh it with, you know, the long term. I mean, it's, you know, obviously short term, it's a lot different than it's 40 years. So it's a long term.
it may
And they
not
usually
be
don't
the
make a
current-
significant change in,
Not be the current rate then, is what you're saying.
no, the current rate could be 10% or 3%. It's, they're looking at they're an assumption. And so as we look at OPEB and pension, they're based on assumptions and estimates. They're not like a debt where we sign the dotted line and we have to pay that total amount.
Yeah, John.
When you do the other one, which I applaud you for doing that, it's a very nice report, it'd be great to distinguish between the payments that we are making based on the current actuarial requirements, based on the current salaries being paid, versus the makeup payments that we're making. Because I think it's important to realize, and for the public and employees to realize, that we are ensuring a level of future income that the
Sure.
private sector does not, and that comes at a premium, and people need to realize that that's a compensation benefit. And if you don't highlight it and break it out, people don't see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to just briefly go over FY20 year-to-date results. On November 30th, we have the glide path where we have 2 or 3 years of, 2 years of averages that our revenues are on the bottom line, where the purple is the revenue trend and the blue is the actual revenue, and right in line for previous years. And then our expenditures are more the straight line, and that is more in trend with last year's also, last 2 years. And this is the actual numbers. Obviously, revenues we bill in December and in June, so a lot of the revenues don't come in until after December. So we're at 32% variance right now, and a 45% for our expenditures in November. So we still need to collect about 67.8% of our revenue, and that these are the dates for regular or different types of taxes. And so in December, we will be providing a written report for the 6 months, and then in March and May, obviously, we'll do the budget proposal and the budget adoption, all the next steps.
Okay, John.
In the CAFR report, when you look at the collections on real estate revenue, you'll notice going back to 2010 to now that we're collecting about 1% less than we collected in 2010. So I'd like to maybe understand what's behind that, even though the absolute amount collected is greater, but the percentage collected is down about 1%. And if you go and look at the utilities, because we know we've had issues with people not being able to pay and having the water turned off, if you go back and look at 2010 to 2018, you'll also notice there's I don't know if it's significant or not, but 1% on a big account, we are collecting a smaller percentage of the total billed amount. And it would be interesting if we understand the reason for that trend, and if you look, it's been almost a continuing downward trend line to that lower number. It's not real low, but it's a difference from what we had in 2010. It would be nice to understand that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
That was a very good report.
Yes, it was.
It was hard listening.
So, Mayor and members of council, our next presentation will be by Emily Archer from the Strategic Growth Area Office and Kay Wilson, our Deputy City Attorney, and they're going to be briefing you on small cell design guidelines and some proposed changes for small cell design implementation.
I get the kind of Tylenol.
Wish I had my idea.
Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I'm Emily Archer. I'm a planner and urban designer with our Planning Department and Strategic Growth Area Office. I'm here to kind of brief you today on this issue and introduce some guidelines that we've developed. So what is 5G small cell? You might have heard about this. So it's the 5th generation of wireless coming to your phones in the future. It's a different technology that will be deployed via small cell infrastructure. In the poles that you may have heard about going up are not actually carrying 5G just yet. This map on the right talks about where 5G has actually been deployed as of August of this year. So what carrier is doing what and where. So the poles going up are really just supplementing our existing 3 or 4G system at this time. 5G or small cells really are a lot smaller, but it's really referring more to range than it is to the size of the equipment. So our taller macro towers that you've gotten used to in our landscape are still going to be active. It's not like these are coming down. This is really going to be supplementing moving forward. And then these small cells are really more about smaller range. So the range is only a couple 500 feet, a couple 100 feet for these, and really only service about 40 to 50 users on one pole. So there's going to be a lot more of them. You can see the size comparison. Per regulation, they could be up to 28 square cubic feet, which is about as big as a refrigerator. You can see the kind of aqua thing on the smaller utility pole that they could fit on. I will leave it up to Kay Wilson to talk about the legal constraints that we're working under. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
How are you? I just have the one slide, so. There are federal regulations that are impeding anything we really want to do with these small cells. The FCC has released a declaratory ruling that talks about the fees for using our right-of-ways and for public property. They cap fees. They give us shot clocks, which are clocks that tell us how long we have to do things. They refuse to grandfather any of the existing agreements or any of the state small cell bills or other things that have been done by the state. So this is the federal government. They've come in and pretty much taken over the area. Virginia is one of the 23 states that had actually done small cell legislation. At this time, we are still working through what has been preempted by the FCC ruling, and we will get that in our zoning ordinance as soon as possible. There was significant changes in 2019. Took a while to get there to accommodate wireless service providers as if they were public utilities. So they have the right to go on our right-of-ways, a right to go on public property. They also made zoning for small cells much easier for wireless providers. Essentially, all of the bills are in favor of the wireless providers. The city can do a few things, which would include the guidance that we have done, but very little else.
So needless to say, we've been kind of inundated with permits with a total of 282 approximately in the last year. Our Permits and Inspection Office routinely handles these with about 40 that total have installed. You can see that some providers are more prominent in this field than others. We expect T-Mobile and Sprint as well eventually. They're on and off a merger, so that's probably delayed them some. And as Kay mentioned, what can we do? So we are allowed to just, adopt aesthetic standards as soon as possible, ideally. That can they not be more burdensome than those applied to other types of infrastructure deployments. They have to be reasonable, objective. There are homeowners that find they're going up and are not happy about them. This is happening around the country. We've received a number of calls and communications from other municipalities and how they're dealing with this. So we have a lot of precedent to draw from developing these guidelines. There are court cases that are going on, and there is a House bill introduced to nullify the FCC ruling, but it's never made it out of committee yet. And some states are asking some municipalities are asking their states to conduct their own health studies about the independent health effects of these small cells. Other than supports of resolution, this is where we are at this time. So we've developed some small cell design guidelines. It's a 14-page document. I believe you have a copy. It's available on our planning website. It was live last week. You can access it from the main page. But the goals are to ensure that these things will harmoniously blend in the existing environment and add value to the surrounding context to the greatest extent possible, enhance the capability of a wireless service in the city for our visitors and residents, and hopefully they can employ it safely, efficiently, and effectively, and comply with, not conflict with, all the applicable state and federal guidelines. There's 3 main sections that kind of outline placement preferences, aesthetic preferences, and co-location preferences for the city. There is the design guidelines strongly encourage co-location. So this is on existing structures, if you could add them to, rather than creating a new pole, monopole in the ground. So the example to the right that has gone up in the city, and the pole to the left, would have been much less impactful on residents of that community and blend more harmoniously into the existing environment if it could have been co-located on the existing street light a couple hundred feet away. There's about 24 criteria for placement preferences in the document. We get pretty picky about requesting that these small cell infrastructure doesn't mess with our signage, streetlights, public transportation, bus shelters, parking meters, barricades, bollards, bike racks, benches, trash receptacles, or streetscape elements, further emphasizing that they should be co-located where preferable, specifically in areas like the resort and town center that there's not a lot available right away. And then the criteria saying, try not to cut down trees or impact our canopy in any way possible with these. The second section, aesthetic preferences, there's about 25 of these criteria. There's a big push in the section to keep it to one pole. If a new pole has to go in the ground, we found some of the earlier examples, the thumbs down image to the left, that it's not just the pole that goes up, it's a separate meter cabinet and second hole in the ground as well, so taking up even more right of way. So illustrating on the image to the right how, best yet, if all the equipment cabinets and meters could be mounted to the pole itself at a height that would not create a visual or physical obstruction, or better yet, incorporate into a decorative base as illustrated to the right in the document. Again, we get picky about the powder coat on these things that should have a double powder coat over all surfaces near the coastal areas, knowing that what our infrastructure deals with in our marine environment in those areas. And then again, finish colors are outlined specifically at the resort where there's a standard kind of pole color for all of our infrastructure. And where there's not a standard, it needs to match whatever else is around it. So again, it's blending more into our environment. And thirdly, our co-location preferences. So third-party structures would be best. So Dominion Power, for instance, owns 46,500 utility poles in the city. That'd be great if they could just go on those first. When it comes to city infrastructure, the police camera poles are one of our first preferences for co-location. The police have been very receptive to having additional poles to attach cameras to, specifically at the resort and beyond. City-owned streetlights, there's only about 3,500 of these, but so far as Public Works has been receptive to agreeing to this. It will require some updates to our franchise agreement, maintenance, who owns what at the end of the day, how they access it. And then lastly, city parking facilities. So there's not a ton of opportunity for this. Really, it's the 9th Street Garage and city-owned surface lots around the city. So this is our proposed adoption schedule, subject to your input. We've briefed the Resort Area Commission, Central Business District Association, Bayfront Advisory Commission, Planning Commission tomorrow, The website went live last week. We proposed that we'd like to accept comments on the draft guidelines for the next month or so, incorporate whatever comes in, and hopefully come back for formal adoption of this document, design guidelines, to give it as most credence as much possible in January, February timeframe. Any questions?
That's it? Good. Any questions? Okay, John, Michael, then John.
It was mentioned earlier that there are federal and state mandates which really prevent municipalities from having much jurisdiction with the implementation of the towers and small cell technologies. And so I wonder, so I understand that, and I want to reinforce that point for all of us and for our community. This is in many ways a issue that's related to the Commonwealth and their regulatory agencies. However, there are some ways in which the city can have a positive impact on making the impact as little as possible on quality of life in our neighborhoods, as well as the property values for Virginia Beach residents. And there are ways we can work collaboratively to, say, install the towers, install the poles in areas that are as least intrusive as possible on the homeowner's lot. And certainly I'm told that there are ways that we can co-locate, as you mentioned. And so I think that's all great. I wonder if you could expand any further on what residents could do to, or what the city, first what the city could do in order to make the impact as little as possible on neighborhoods, and two, what residents can do in order to facilitate that dialogue and that cooperation.
Well, the city is doing what it can. These guidelines are particularly one of the things that the FCC ruling says we can do. We can do guidelines, but remember, what are guidelines? Guidelines are only suggestions. They're not requirements. But I think if we tell the communications companies that this is what we'd like to see, and if you are in compliance with these provisions, you're going to get quicker approval, it's going to be easier for you to go through the system, that we should get some cooperation from them. I would let you know that some of the people who have complained to the Verizons and other companies of the telecommunication industry about where the pole was situated have received some relief. They have moved the pole, or they've painted it a different color, whatever they needed to do to help the homeowner. The homeowner should contact the company that's got the pole in the city right away. This is not on their lots. It's on that portion of the lot that everybody thinks is theirs.
Yeah.
But it belongs to the city. So they should contact, there should be a name on the pole, and they should contact the company, the Verizons, the Sprints, whatever it is. We can give them
But
numbers.
you're right, you're correct, and I'm glad you pointed that out. It is not on their lot.
Yeah.
However, that's a nuanced distinction in the
Yes.
neighborhood. And so, you know, I just think it's really important that and I know we are, and I've spoken with representatives from AT&T and Verizon, and I know that it's top of their mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to make sure that as the city of Virginia Beach is doing everything to provide those resources. And I don't know, and I know that there's some landing pages the providers have. Do we have anything like that in the city of Virginia Beach? For example, if you could go to vbgov.com and find out more information, kind of a menu of resources.
Well, I know that
Do we have anything like that?
Ms. Bryan has sent out, I think it's a 2-page information sheet that lists all of the providers, as well as telephone numbers and things of that order. I don't know whether it's on the planning page or
It
not.
is, and there was a 411 that was done, so there's a link, there's a communications page about if you see a tower going up, and there's lists all the communication providers and their contact information. And then we kind of duplicated that in the planning and provided links to it. It was where you can download the design guidelines, watch the 411 video, and if you see a tower going up, call these numbers. Last slide really quick. I did want to point out that, the image on the right, we were developing these guidelines as permits are coming in. This is an active process, and they have been receptive to our co-location preferences. This is an active permit drawing in planning and permits right now for co-location on Atlantic Avenue on existing streetlights. So they are receptive so far to what we've been requesting and are working with us.
Thank you. Sorry, I just have a couple follow-up questions. I see that we've done a really great job of briefing some key stakeholders. I know this issue in particular is of interest to the Green Run community. I know that many towers are being installed there, and I don't see any civic organizations or civic leagues listed here, but I'm sure that outreach has been done to those neighborhood organizations as well.
If not, we will definitely double check.
I would, if I could just encourage
Yes.
everyone who's involved in that effort to do that.
I know if they were not actually given a briefing, they were given Ms. Bryan's white memo on the issue and with all the telephone numbers. I know they were given that. They seem to be going through the city not in a haphazard manner, but neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood. So.
And right now, it's, I know,
Green Run.
greatly impacting Green Run. But could we just take a moment, this is my final question, I promise, to just briefly present some of the virtues of this technology, some of the advantages that as consumers and residents will have as a result of the implementation of this new technology?
Hey, Bobby, how you doing?
Good. So the cellular technology for small cell is being installed. So if you've ever been in a situation where you have 4 bars and you're not able to get through because of the amount of traffic, the small cell technology is supposed to take that on and allow it to get on to access. So that's the benefit of it. It's to help supplement the existing towers. So we know that there was a situation whenever we have a large festival and everyone's using their cell phones, that there are troubles to get your access. When we have incidents and other things where it's hard to get access when everyone's using their cell phones. This gives it another landing spot for us to continue to get access. To also supplement what Ms. Wilson and Ms. Archer had noted, vbgov.com/planning. On the left side, there's a link that is all the information that we have on small cell towers, which includes the white paper, the video, the Formal 1 video, the design guidelines, and all of the other information that we have. And we will gladly provide the information. What's been happening is the public has been mostly calling the zoning office first, our zoning division, and we are trying to direct them to the site and say, if you have questions, please contact us again, but this is the meat of the information. And we are working with the companies in order to provide them with the opportunity to find a location rather than force us to give them a location.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wood?
If I could just follow up on that, I would say that that's accurate because I know that there's a good number of first responders in Virginia Beach now that use a FirstNet, which is an AT&T product that gives them priority in these things, but they're doing it on their own dime. And I believe Verizon's getting ready to roll one out similar to that. So it is a major public safety concern as well.
Good. Guy?
It strikes me that by the time you see a plaque on a pole, it may be a little late for if you're not happy with the location. What typically triggers the call from the resident? How do they know that a pole is going?
It's usually the contractors are already out there.
They see the contractor
They are,
in there,
yes.
right? There's no pre-notification, neighborhoods or
No.
any
What's-
kind of like that?
What's happening at this point is the influx of permits we're getting, they are pulling permits, but they're not necessarily putting them in the ground. So there are a lot of permits that have been issued at this point, but they are going through and going, okay, we're going to install this one now because this one's the priority. So even we don't know the installation timelines that they're going in with. They're just kind of dropping in with the company and putting a bunch of them in. Luckily now with more of with notice to us so that we can try to discuss it with them. So, but you're right. The first thing that they'll notice when it comes up is that there will be a contractor on site ready to install one.
Okay, John, then Jim.
Couple things. I think you made it very clear, people read this document, and for my neighbors online, so I can tell you're having success. But there's a lot of should words in here, but in the preamble of the document, it doesn't make it very clear that there's nothing in here that's obligatory on the companies to comply. And I think you read this and you think you're seeing should, and it gives people a sense that this is what they have to do, because they don't see should in the same way that an attorney would see should. So I think it's important in that preamble that gets highlighted so that people see it in the right context. I do agree, I've met with the people, and I think they are really trying to not create issues, they're trying to be good neighbors. But the thing that she commented about, because everybody looks for their name, you know, when they're looking at a document, where's my name? This thing says, in resort and strategic growth areas, including the boardwalk, co-location should be considered first. I really think the answer should be throughout Virginia Beach, whether it's Green Run, the resort, Pungo, whatever it is, existing infrastructures, and people pick up on those little subtleties because they think they've been left out. But this is a very promising technology. It's a technology that gives people the liberty to free themselves from cable providers of television services. And there's much more competition in the broadband environment than there is in the ground embedded cable with higher capital costs. So the competition is a huge benefit to consumers who consume video services. Might have some impact on what we collect also. But citizens will be better off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice brief.
Jim?
Can we get, Bobby, a list of the addresses of where these permits have been issued?
Yes, we can get that in one of the bureaucratic packets.
That'd be great, thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you all very much. Okay, moving on, council discussion. We have a couple items coming forward next month on council-sponsored forums and events. I thought we would have a discussion today. And if we can, I would like, we'll have Mr. Wood and then Ms. Wooten, talk about their respective plans and see if we can maybe find some consensus and collaboration.
Yeah, there's two different ones there. One is Ms. Wooten's resolution or ordinance request, and the other is the one that the mayor so graciously attributed solely to me, but if you'll see, it's got his name on it, too.
There you go. There needs to be one more of these, I guess.
You need
I
another
need
one?
one more.
Which one, Jessica?
It's the council forum one. No, that one was, this is the transfer, and this is.
All right, we're good.
All right, we're
On
good
this
now.
side.
Came around the other side.
Okay.
Well,
So-
wait, oh, hold on. I've got one document.
Yeah, the other one's coming back
Oh,
around
okay,
to you
never
here.
Sorry.
Is the holdup, Mr. Rouse?
I
is
think
that
we're
the
good
holdup?
now.
No, it was, yeah, I take it out. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, that's on me.
So the one that
Got both,
the
John.
mayor and I brought forward is a, and this, if y'all recall, this was several months ago. We did this October 3rd, 2019. Happens to be my birthday, by the way, October 3rd was. I'm sure that's why y'all remember that date. But
I'll say yes.
it was essentially changing the, and providing guidance to indicate how city council member sponsored forums and events would be undertaken. And it's fairly simple. And if you can read the policy here and take a look at it, I'm sure everybody's seen it, but essentially it was, most of the venues that, well, anytime that we have town halls or anything like that, we can go to high schools or rec centers or places like that, and it's free. And typically, there's no additional expense because staff, if staff comes along, then that's part of, the payment. I think probably the only, there's probably actually no additional cost to that. So the purpose of this, based on the other resolutions going around, was a member of council seeks to hold an event at a venue for which a fee must be paid, or to hold an event that will entail more than a nominal fee, and the city attorney, came up with a nominal fee of $50 or less out-of-pocket expenditures, then that shall be require the approval of city council. So it's fairly straightforward because, I think every time we have one of these things, typically they're at facilities that the city we can use for free. So.
There's a lot of things.
I only have one comment.
Yeah, John?
That no such event shall occur 90 days before an election.
That's correct.
Something like that.
Are you saying that you want to add that to it?
Yes, I think that's a good addition.
Is that long enough?
I'm up to longer, but I know Congress is 60 is what they do, but 90 make sure that no one is.
Well, are you saying no town hall meetings either?
I'm just saying, yeah, because you're using a school that another person can't use for free, it is a competitive advantage whether you indifferent. But I just think I just think it's a good move, and I just think it's, Congress is 60 days. If you said 60, I could live with that too. I'm just saying,
Any member or those that are
those
running?
up front, those are up for election, correct. I just think it avoids any appearance that the government is leveraging and providing an advantage. It's just, the cleaner you can make it, the better it is.
I think it's a good addition.
Do you-
Regular
the
town
staff does
hall,
that?
I think, is a different thing. I mean,
Well, then if we do that, then I think we should, in there to campaign season, people who aren't candidates should be able to use schools and city buildings too. I mean, you might not think like it's a different, but I know congressmen are suffering under that. It's 60 days, they can't go on military installations, they can't get their picture taken, they can't do a number of things because of, it's the appearance.
Usually campaign season starts like about Labor Day.
So if it said 60, I could live with that. That's just a suggestion, if, we'll support it either way, it's just a suggestion.
Okay, Barbara?
No, I was just,
Okay.
I was asking him about
I had a-
anything.
Okay.
I like
Jess?
John's idea. I had a technical question. Would that preclude a council member from participating in like a town hall that the body put together as a whole? No? Oh, okay.
Because that would be a special meeting, right?
Yeah, I mean, anytime more than two of you are present, it should be pursuant to a called special meeting.
So it wouldn't matter if we included that? Oh, okay. I just wanted to clarify.
I think I'm more comfortable with 90, frankly, but.
Okay, Tom?
I assume that would exclude if the staff held a public meeting on a road project, the council persons, whether they're up for election or not, could still attend, and they invariably would get
That would be a
questions.
city-sponsored event that would be part of our duty and responsibility to attend.
Yeah, and it's important, though, if it's your district, that you need to be able to attend that.
He's right. Well, I'm not referring to any of that stuff. Like, I call a town hall and I'm at the central library. And that's what I'm referring to. That's
A council called town meeting.
correct. The council-sponsored event. The council person.
An individual.
Correct.
Okay.
90 days?
So then
either
based
way.
on that, but both of these are coming, because if y'all recall, we deferred both of them until the first meeting in January.
Correct.
And when we were doing the agenda last week, we wanted to make sure that we had that. So I wanted to make sure this one, because I think this one may be a little bit easier to go through, because we still have to go through the other ones. If everybody's okay with this, is it kind of the collective will that people would like to add a 60 or 90 day?
Yes.
Which do people want?
Yeah, probably at this point for 90, I think would be,
So, no, let me make sure I understand what I'm writing for the body collectively. No council person standing for election shall host a forum or other event within 90 days preceding the election at which that council member is standing.
correct.
Dana will word it much more clearly than that, but that is the concept.
Using city resources and city facilities.
Yeah, 'cause
What if they do it on their own?
Yeah.
Well, that's fine.
Using using city or schools resources
yes.
or facilities.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Okay,
Good job, Jim.
okay. Sabrina?
I'd like to take all the credit, but
So
your name's on it.
the resolution that I presented, again, I pretty much went over what it was for, but it was an answer in response to the resolution that was brought forward by the mayor and the vice mayor. And the details are laid out concerning the background, considerations, and so forth. I do appreciate the attachment of the expenditures to the resolution. This information, though, might I add, was clearly stated when I gave my statement during the first initial time I presented the resolution. So that information was pretty much out there, and make sure that people were aware of it. The only thing I can say regarding the resolution that I presented is we understand, or we've had a disparity study in the results that were submitted, which is the reason why I offered the Ignite program, business series, and the disparity study forum to, in fact, bring awareness and address the factors and facts that came out by the disparity study. I don't think this is anything different than the forum or the series that's led on flooding, because in my opinion, if you don't have leadership in areas like this, which the disparity study is a very serious matter for our city, and we do have to show the public that we are moving forward, and it can't not just be lip service, but it has to be demonstrated in a collective effort with our city staff, with what they're doing, the Minority Business Council with what they're doing. And I also see the need to lead this effort from a city council perspective. And I've taken up that leadership role and happy to do so because it is important that we bring awareness to the issue, accountability, and address it. And so the resolution lays out the what, where, why. You have the expenditures that have been listed. And so I'm happy to answer any questions. It will be back before you again. It was delayed because some people said they did have questions. But that is, in essence, the goal of the resolution for the Ignite Business Series and the Disparity Forum to have a continued leadership presence for that and making sure that we're addressing that major issue concerned with our disparity study.
Okay, discussion? The only thing I can, say, Sabrina, that I think just going forward as we demonstrate to the public that we're stewards of the money, if we have venues that we could utilize that don't incur an expenditure. We have a number of venues that are available in the city, available for such purposes. And the other thing is maybe to collaborate with the initiatives of the Minority Business Council and the other, things that are trying to, promote business in the city and everything. I just think, we have to avoid redundancy, but we also have to say if we can save some money by just using facilities that we have that would more than accommodate, that's what I'm saying. I'm just concerned about expenditures for certain venues.
So may I respond?
Sure.
So let's take your first concern with the expenditures. Many of the facilities or several of the facilities that were used were at no cost as far as the facility. The cost might have been for maybe setting up chairs and something of that nature. But the cost to use a facility itself, that was not something that the city paid for. Also, with that, I have seen on council where we have meetings, town halls, community conversations in specific areas. We have to broaden that, and that's what I decided to do with the Disparity Forum, with the Ignite Business Series, because having that type of seminar in one specific area all the time, you're not addressing the city. And so I thought it prudent to work throughout the city. ATC Center, then we're here in the town center area, and then another area to kind of get the buy-in and also to get the participation of other citizens in our community that's needed. And I see that's needed across the board in other areas. We can't just continue to have, concert our efforts in one part of the city and not throughout. So that was the purpose of extending the business series throughout the city, since it is a city issue. And all citizens should be aware and have the opportunity to participate. Secondly, in regards to the Minority Business Council, I have no problem with coordinating efforts. But I would note that oftentimes we can do things the same way, and then we expect to get different results. Here, the disparity study shows that we must take different steps. We can't continue to do the same thing over and over again. By that I mean, we've had the Minority Business Council for several years, and they've been diligently working in their area. But the statistics say, the findings say of the disparity study, that's not enough. Therefore, I submit to you, we need to work in other areas, through other programs, through other seminars, to make sure that we're actually addressing this issue. Continuing to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, it's not going to work. And the citizens see what we're doing as well. And in an effort to show them that we're serious about the disparity study, we're serious about addressing this matter, we must take additional steps to do such. I'd also like to mention at this time too about the budget. Last year there was $100,000 that was supposed to be implemented to address the findings. There was only approval for $30,000. And I mentioned to the city manager at that time, if we are serious about addressing the disparity study, the funding allocated to do so must be distributed to address the issue. Otherwise, we're not showing a serious effort.
Okay, Jess?
I appreciate you doing all this work because it's a really important issue, and we have a long road ahead of us in terms of how we're going to handle making progress on something that we prioritized the last 3 years I've been on council. The money aside, can we get a copy? I don't know if you have it, or maybe somebody from staff can provide us a copy of the program of the last 3 seminars so we can see kind of, I was unable to attend them, but I think it would be helpful in us understanding the business case for it and why this is the best route forward. Not saying it's not, I genuinely want to know. So if maybe we could see like the program, or how, I don't know if there was a video recording of one of the seminars. I'd be very interested in seeing on how it's set up, and I mean, if it's successful, we should do it. The other point I just wanted to make, when I was at Kellam High School, I was a part of the Kellam Theater program my entire 4 years there. And one of the things Kellam High School did particularly well, and this was the old Kellams before they got their state-of-the-art facility that they have now, is we hosted many community meetings as a way for the theater department to give its students experience in running a variety of programs. And we had, even then in 2004, 5, 6, and 7, some of the best technology for running a program. And I would love to see how we could incorporate, I get your point, we should be spreading this around the city, making it more accessible for people to be able to attend, because we don't all live in one place, and we're a huge city. So I think maybe even capitalizing on the investment that the school board and us have put into our public school system, because we have amazing theaters. And you capitalizing on the kids that go to those schools that want to learn a really valuable skill that can be applicable in a lot of different jobs. I think that might be a nice partnership. But I'm really interested in seeing how the program works, and if there was a program that was taped, can we see it? I don't think it has to be in a public briefing, but I'd be really interested to see how it was set up and executed and all of that. That's just kind of where I'm at.
Yes.
So I appreciate Councilmember Abbott, your comments, and might I add that it is successful. The Ignite series has been successful, and I've heard from several members who've attended, business owners, who appreciate the seminars that are going forth, the information, because one of the key findings of the disparity study was just the fact of the information, education, awareness. And that's an area that's lacking, and that the Ignite Business Series kind of brings that information directly to the citizens so that they can hear, they're able to analyze, decipher, and then connect with city officials, staff members, and then other resource partners in the community where they have issues or concerns and they're addressed. So it definitely is a successful measure. To your point regarding the programs and the agenda, I believe we do have the information on file. I don't know if I have a copy of it or city staff has a copy of it. We can get you that information. In terms of, I don't believe programs were taped in its entirety, but that's something that I'd have to address with the staff to get that information. So I can get that to you. If any other council member has a question and would like to see that information, I can make that available to you as well. But I believe I'll have to reach out to the city staff because they printed the agendas for it.
Yeah, and I wasn't asserting it's not successful. I just
Well, no, I
it's
just wanted
hard
to confirm
yeah.
that it is.
I
So
just we
if
don't have any
people are
content
watching
to
who are wondering
sure. Yeah.
what you brought up. I wanted to confirm without a doubt it is.
Yeah, well, I just would like to see what the information that was given out, and I think that would be helpful, and I would have no
Sure.
problem supporting something like this. I just would like to have the information.
Sure, and I believe every event that was done, I pass out information about it, inviting council members to come. So I always made that information readily available. Also, the information, I believe I've posted it on Facebook, just making sure people are abreast, and if they have questions, the information's always laid out so that people understand what's involved.
I'll get
Louis,
what-
then Aaron.
I'll get whatever the staff has.
Say that again?
I will get whatever the staff has.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sabrina,
Yes.
I'm not clear on what happened, okay? I'm assuming that you've had 1, 2, 3, 4 events, is that correct?
That's correct.
And asked the staff to fund some
No.
refreshments and so forth for it, is that what happened? Or
Well, if we go back to the initial way the series started, actually, I remember having dialogue with our city manager, our previous city manager, expressing the concerns about the disparity study and how we could move forward. And at that time, he indicated that he believed this is something that the city council should take on and take a leadership role in that. I don't know whether conversations were had with the mayor or any other council members about doing that, but from the correspondence that I saw, the mayor was CC'd on it, and the city attorney was CC'd on what the request was and what I was going to do. And so in that effort, because it was approved to go forward, then whatever was needed to address the resources, then those resources were made available.
But now, we have one issue, and the issue is the funding for these events that have taken place. And then is there other events that you have planned that you're asking for support for also, or?
No.
Okay.
What you have in the resolution that I submitted to you is actually all of the programs that I will actually be requesting support on in its
And
entirety.
they've already occurred, is that correct?
The attached information that you have is a list of what has already occurred.
Yeah.
In my resolution, you will see a projected request and estimate for funding that the city staff believes is needed to carry on the series and the disparity
How
study
many
forward.
more series how many more?
So the three is usually a quarterly series. This time it was 3.
You want
It's
it
three.
to
It was
be
3 series.
ongoing is what you're
Correct.
saying.
Correct. As our need to address the disparity study is ongoing, so is the need to continue the program with the Ignite series and disparity study.
But we'd be using public facilities in the future.
Well, correct. The city facilities that I have used in the past, Yes.
So we have two issues. We have an issue that we have these 4 functions that have taken place in which city expenditures were made, to support the meetings, and then you're asking that we continue doing that. Is that correct? That's the second issue, is that correct?
That is correct, because the resolution that was presented stated that I do so, and therefore I answered with that resolution.
I think, as a new council member, my personal opinion is that as a new council member, it's understandable that you made an assumption like that, perhaps, and that the city should pay for the functions that have occurred. But I don't know that I want to support doing them in the future for individual council people. So that's my view on the thing.
Okay,
So
Aaron?
let me just
Okay.
make a point of clarity, Councilmember Jones. There was no assumption on my part. As I mentioned before, the dialogue took place with our previous city manager, who authorized such. Therefore, I proceeded accordingly.
Okay, well, if he authorized it, then you're in the clear as far as it's concerned.
Correct.
And it's the future that we're dealing with now.
That is true, but I just want to make sure you understand there was no assumption on my part. I did make sure I did my due diligence.
It's a good point for you to
Yes,
make.
sir, have to, yes.
Aaron? Councilman Wooten, I applaud you taking a step in trying to make sure we implement a lot of things we learned from the disparity study. One of my questions for you, help me understand, is your Business Ignite series. How does your Business Ignite series lead to contracting with the city? And I guess on a part of what Councilwoman Abbott asked you, do you have evaluations for like the participants? Do you have the information? How does the Ignite series lead to contract with the city? And I ask you that because I know Economic Development has the Small Business Institute, so I'm looking for ways that we can collaborate and really bring them together, but I'm not understanding the benefits of or the difference that maybe your Ignite series have. So if you can help me understand that.
So the first Ignite series was doing business with the city and doing business in the city, which addresses your query regarding, how it helps people get contracts. Because we had actually staff members and other resource partners there, SWAM, staff members who were there to assist people with understanding how to connect and obtain contracts within the city. And then because we understand that the city may not be able to connect and help everyone with a contract, we also have to, expand that series and make sure people understand you also can do business in the city. So that should address that question.
So do you collect, I guess my question is, do you collect like evaluations from it that says that, so you can have the I don't want to say evidence, but the tangible like accreditation to say we helped this business from point A to B to C, and that led to maybe contracting or signing up with opportunity with the city? How you're evaluating basically where you are, your Ignite seminars are the type of value it is having in the community.
I would say from speaking, I don't have a specific evaluation that you're requesting, but that's something we certainly can do and add to this that would bring added value. My confirmation is speaking to everyday business owners who attend, who tell me that they were able to obtain a contract with the city of Virginia Beach. They got more information on how they could resubmit their request for a contract. Or in our second business series, we focused on capital, which we understand that more than half of the businesses fail because they don't have access to capital. So in my opinion, that was a critical seminar to have to connect people with those resources. And we had several resource partners come in, and also businesses within the city that came in and were able to educate people on what they can do, where they can go, how they can connect with these resources and capital. The third Ignite series focused on entrepreneurship, and it's important. Oftentimes we have programs that focus on bringing businesses in outwardly and having them come in and talk about what they do and educate the public. But this series focused on local business owners who are entrepreneurs and successful. They were able to come in and provide what they did to become successful, the steps, the tools, which many of the participants came up and said, this was more than I expected, and this helps me. Because what I would also say, we have to consider the hope factor, because within our city, we know that we have a history, and the disparity study shows that we have a history that we need to help our minority business owners connect with contracts, and we don't have a good track record on that. And so you find many of the entrepreneurs and business owners within the city turning away from Virginia Beach, going to other cities who are able to become successful at what they're doing. And so a lot of business owners and citizens have become very discouraged. And the series that I find brings back that hope, that glimmer, if you might say, to prospective entrepreneurs and business owners that, hey, which connects with what the mayor says oftentimes, the city of Virginia Beach is open for business. And so it helps to, bring back that hope that, business owners can come in and once again, look to do business with our city, within our city as entrepreneurs, and find that sustainability through resources and tools and education to grow and expand.
So I guess how does the Business Ignite seminar, your series, how does that differ from the Small Business Institute that Economic Development has? And if it doesn't differ, if they do if they mirror each other, how can we put those together? How can we work together on that aspect?
I think with, I think I've already said that I'm very open to collaboration, and I've attended the Small Business Institute to see what goes on and to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, because that's not my goal. And the Ignite Business Series is not duplicating efforts. So within that institute, you have someone who is an instructor, trainer, and he is actually sitting down with people going through the elementary stages of starting a business. A proposal. How do you put together the elements of a proposal? How do you come up with a business plan? What are the steps to do that? So those are the elementary stages of becoming an entrepreneur and a business owner. That is not something that I can take the time to do in a business series.
Okay, Mr. Wood, and then Rosemary.
Sabrina, I have just a couple of quick questions here, and I wanted to go back to, I think, the question John had, or Lewis, I can't remember, one of y'all said. You were talking about the facilities that you're going to go to in 2020. I think John said these are going to be the free facilities, and you said they're going to be the same ones you used before, which, by my calculations, cost about $2,100 in facility fees based on this. So which one was it? I'm just curious about that.
Can you clarify your answer, your response, or your question?
My question?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
So, John, you asked if these were going to be, because based on the policy that we just said that we're going to enact, it said that we're going to use free facilities, which are rec centers, schools, places like that, city buildings down here, ATC, stuff like that. And then it's either Lewis or John asked you, were you going to use those facilities? And you said yes, and then you said, but I'm going to use the ones I used before. And that's why that was two answers. I'm just curious what is. So do you plan in this to use the facilities we talked about and contemplate in this new ordinance?
You know, the best way to answer that question, I do, as long as the same process is in place to which I entered in previously, which is a city facility is not just a school or gym but we also have access to other facilities like the Sandler Center. We also have access to the Ziders. And the city has a certain amount of opportunities to use those facilities without having to pay for them. And so in this instance, that's what I did. If it was a facilities fee, it was waived because it was the city putting on.
That's not what this says. This indicates we paid $600 to the Sandler on September 22nd.
It was one
That
for
was for
$1,400.
cleaning and security. It was not to actually to use the facility itself.
And then $915 to the Zyder on June 22nd, and then another $600 to Sandler on another September 21st.
So that fee was supposed to be waived.
$1,600 was something else.
That fee was supposed to be waived. I spoke specifically with Mike Zyder. He asked me if I was going to use it. He said, I will waive the fee. By the time the conversation got back to Mr. Taylor Adams, I guess he didn't, I don't know what happened. I didn't take over from that point. But I did have confirmation that we didn't have to incur that cost. So I contacted Taylor to find out what happened. I haven't received a response regarding that as of yet.
Okay.
But in the future, that's not something that I would ask the city or anyone else to support.
And then the other question I have is.
Because we're not going to pay for facilities for that.
All right. So then your intention is to do free facilities then?
That is correct.
Okay. Then it indicates on here that you've got them scheduled for, I just saw it on here, February 15th, June 20th, and September 19th. Assuming you're on the ballot, probably the September 19th one could not occur based on the new policy. But that's a separate thing. But that's three of them for $10,000, and I'm trying to figure out how you got to $10,000 on that, because the other ones, it cost $5,700 for four. And so for $10,000, we should get eight,
Okay.
7.5-ish.
So let me address your concerns. I guess first off, as it relates to the funding, now, and I would ask you, Mark, if you would tell him where that came from, because that's, from what I understand, an estimate that the city thinks is necessary to host these events. That's not what I asked for, but that's what was mentioned to me, that would be a good estimate to host such forums.
David, do you know?
It was really just pulled from the 5,700 number and given some wiggle room. It was just a guess.
And double?
Well, I understand your point. To allow wiggle room, it was just a number thrown out there. I'm more than willing to adjust downward.
So am I. Because that was not my specific request for that. But I'm happy to reduce that request and that estimate, and I'm happy to adjust the date so that there is no conflict with the newly proposal that's been placed on the table
I just
and
was just thinking
agreed
of that
to.
when I saw it. So the other question, I don't know who on staff is getting the agenda, but I think following up on both what Aaron and Jessica said, it'd be nice to get a list of the attendees who signed in, so we can see the different companies and stuff. I think that would be good to see.
Would you be able to provide that? Thank you very much.
I got a question.
Okay, Rosemary and then you, okay, and then Barbara.
I did attend one of these, the one at the Sandler with, there was a panel, and it was very good. And there was a lot of people there, it was well attended. But I kind of have to agree that we have, like Jessica raised, we have so many beautiful auditoriums across the city, And if one of your goals is to be in different places of the city, rather than pretty much like at the town center, maybe that would be a really good consideration. But I thought it was well done, it was well attended. I enjoyed it. I think in some ways, it's really not much different than a council member doing a town hall meeting. You know, if a council member calls a meeting and has this done, if it's done in free facilities, and I think if you kind of limited to more free facilities, and I don't see it much different than having a town hall meeting, but you did a very nice job.
I appreciate that. I definitely will take those things into consideration, because I do want to keep in line with making sure we're not creating any, additional costs or extra costs that don't need to be incurred. Thank you.
Okay, Aaron, then Barbara.
No, I just for my own understanding, my own questions, probably to Mark. If I host a town hall or an event, and if it's obviously usually after hours, does staff have to pay for overtime? I mean, does staff get paid overtime for that?
It usually depends on what level of staff you're talking about, but typically the level of staff that you would be inviting would be an exempt employee who you would not pay overtime for.
Okay.
I mean, there are exceptions to that, but
They're
very few.
they're more than willing to come and support you, as long as it's not every single night, so we.
Okay, I just my own understanding, I just want to ask that. Yeah.
There are many dedicated staff, they are almost always exempt,
Right.
and they.
Okay.
We never have any trouble getting people to show up, as long as
Okay.
it's within reason and they're not away from home every night.
So, Tom, for example, when you came to like a Civic League meeting under Public Works,
Absolutely.
yeah. you
Or
were not-
Mark Johnson, or any of the directors, and even their direct reports, and rarely is it someone who's being compensated. I can't say it never happens,
Right.
but we can absorb that, that's not much of
Okay.
an issue. But with little exception, it's exempt employees who are more than happy to be there.
Oh.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Barbara?
We received the disparity study just about a year ago, in January 2019. Are you planning to do a staff update on the progress the city has made? Are we tracking that, and are we going to
Yes.
see how much?
Finance has, and we have presented in the past, and we can certainly refresh that again, but they have a plan where they're implementing what they can. There are a few issues that go, such as things like sheltered bidding and things that are being discussed with the law department as to what can and cannot be done. But and quite a bit of the recommendations from the disparity study are tied in with the implementation of the new ERP, and that's Enterprise Resource Program, I believe. It is the program that will manage our finances and will provide the reports. What we have now is a very, very difficult system for actually figuring out what was a small and a woman and a minority and a disadvantaged business. The new system will have all of that. It will also greatly enhance the bidding outreach to SWAM businesses, because they can register on a web page, and every time there's a bid, it automatically goes out to them. So
we can expect that sometime the
Yes.
first of the year?
Yes.
That's good, I think that's important.
Okay, Aaron?
You were next? You were next, Michael? No, I got this. I'm just messing. I'm looking forward to the update in January. As I understand, one of the things the disparity study showed was around $100,000, I believe, to implement newer or to get ahead to trying to mitigate some of the disparities here. I would like for council, and particularly coming up in the budget season, to look at how we can use some of those funds, particularly towards some of the other ways, such as the Minority Business Council and the Small Business Institute, and if council approves the Small Business Ignite. But I really think we should reach that mark of using the recommendations from the disparity study of $100,000 to mitigate a lot of those disparities.
Hey, Michael?
Well, I just want to thank Councilmember Wooten for her efforts to bring discussion around the disparity study and the topic of equity in our city, which is something that's very important to me, and I know it's very important to this body as well. And most importantly, it's important to the health of our community. And so I'm deeply grateful for your efforts to bring awareness and to bring solutions to those questions. But the mechanics of that process are ones that I feel I have an obligation to address here today. Because we do have the Small Business Institute as well as the Minority Business Council, in particular with regard to the Minority Business Council, I know that many members of our community volunteer their time to work on this very topic and to work on this question. And I think that on one hand, we need to work together, and we shouldn't be in silos. And on one hand, there's a great merit to your point that we can't do things the same way and expect different results. However, for this particular program, there appears to be very little coordination or collaboration with volunteers who we've asked to donate their time to study this very topic and to make recommendations to alleviate some of the concerns that have been raised by the disparity study. And you know, I'm not asking for a response or a specific remedy, but I think it's important for any initiative we undertake to keep that in mind and to really respect the hard work that's being done by volunteers who we've asked to do that work. And so I hope that there will be collaboration on this and every other issue. And as well as on the topic of expenditures, I think that we you know, Councilmember Wilson made a point that this is very similar to a town hall, but in fact it's not in many ways as well too, because we don't provide catering at town halls, and catering is offered at these. And I work in a place where I recognize that food can be an important component of a healthy conversation and can be very impactful in bringing people together. So I see a lot of value there, but I do think it's important to make that distinction. And I think because taxpayer resources are being used in this effort, that it's important that we draw that out and make sure that everyone's aware and everyone would be comfortable with that. And finally, and this is no commentary on this specific program, but this discussion brought this comment to light. I think in addition to the policy that was requested by the mayor and vice mayor, that includes some framework for council member sponsored events, one component that I think we need to consider is the communications element. You know, I mentioned before that we could be potentially entering a really gray area if individual members of council are sponsoring events that they are the lead on, and they can very quickly enter into an arena that could be perceived either real or that it's a perception that it would be a campaign event, and that we would be using the tools and the infrastructure of the city to promote oneself. I am absolutely not suggesting that's happening here, but I can imagine a scenario that if we didn't have a framework where that could occur. And I think it's particularly important as we think about how we promote these events, that they be linked to the initiatives that are already occurring within city departments and or boards and commissions, and that we also be on the same page about how we promote those events, including with images and likenesses of individual members of council, because in fact they are different than town halls in many ways. And if we could all be on the same page about that, it would make me much more comfortable, because what I can imagine happening, and again, this is not commentary on this initiative, is that individuals could be clamoring. We could be, with a less mature council that may exist in the future, we could be competing with each other to use these platforms to promote each other. And that's not, I can envision that be a very possible scenario, and that won't be good for our city, wouldn't be good for the spirit of collaboration on the council, and it ultimately wouldn't be good for the residents that we serve. So I would like that that we all be on the same page to be included in the policy.
Yes.
I'd like to respond, and Councilmember Berlucci, thank you for your insightful comments and suggestions and concerns. And I think that's why we're talking about it now, so that we won't have those issues and that gray area come up. And this is, I applaud the mayor for putting the topic on the agenda, because we need to have more discussions like this. If, you know, there are concerns about programs that are going on, concerns in the community. There's several things that discussions like this can help, and can help us in the future to make sure that we're not getting, you know, into or going places that we shouldn't go or doing things we shouldn't do, to make sure we stay on track. So as it relates to the volunteers, I'm thinking that you're speaking of the NBC who addressed this concern, of which I was vice chair of the NBC. And so I know intricately the volunteers, what they did, how they did it. And I believe at that time is when I really learned that there are some ways that we could do things better, you know, and I could see the need for having something like this. So that's where I gained that knowledge as a volunteer, serving as the vice chair for the NBC, and on several of their other committees. And so what I would like to do, as I've already mentioned, certainly would love to have that collaboration. We'll be happy to do that. I know that you are now their liaison. If you would like to speak with them to see how I can become more involved and help and lead, I'm happy to do it. I've done it before. As far as the refreshments, let me make sure we understand. This is coffee, juice, and maybe muffins. It's not a catered dinner, not a catered lunch. In fact, these events, the seminars, the disparity study had no refreshments. The business seminars were just, because they were in the morning, coffee, juice, muffins. Now, in any, you know, I think it's standard when you go for seminars that you have something for those attendees. It just seems like it would be standard practice. But if you believe that this series, events and such is not worthy of that, and the participants don't need it, then that's something certainly I consider taking off or providing myself. But it's a standard amenity that you provide in events of this sort. And so in terms of leadership and making sure that we're not promoting one or the other, definitely aware of that and understanding of that, and that's why I reached out to the city attorney to find out, to make sure I am in line with what I'm doing, and to answer the request of the mayor and the vice mayor to submit this resolution, to make sure that, you know, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm answering their request and being in line with that. So I, you know, certainly again appreciate the comments, and this is how I'm addressing it.
Well, I appreciate that. Just to follow up, though, there's a distinction in my mind between what's permissible and what it would be a best practice. And I'm suggesting we adopt some best practices.
I would concur with you on this, and actually there are other areas we need best practices on as well. So I hopefully at a later date we can talk about some of those other areas.
Other topics we should have these
And
types
topics.
of community dialogues as well.
Absolutely, I'm in agreement with that.
Thank you. Now, let me just close by saying, you know, I've heard from a number of people our meetings go a little longer these days, but I say to that, bravo, because these are the type of dialogues that we have to have among ourselves. Dialogues. Thank you. Leave it to Mr. Wood, but I'm just saying that, you know, this is a healthy conversation, and yes, we are taking a little bit more time to deliberate and discuss among ourselves things, and, you know, I applaud this conversation, and thank you. All right, now let's just move forward. City Council comments.
Only one.
John.
Going back to our retreat, one of the things that we said we would like to get, and I remember correctly, went back and looked at my notes, was that we would get weekly with our packet major pieces of correspondence, like a correspondence log where the city manager had communicated with external state agencies or whatever, and I know that hasn't happened yet, but I think it needs to, so, but I do think that's like a read file.
Sure.
You know, and if we could do that, that's my singular comment for a council comment.
Okay, anybody else? Guy?
Just to note that I will be absent at the next meeting, the January 7th meeting, for a long-planned vacation with friends and family. Sorry I won't be here, but
We'll FaceTime you.
Yeah, there you go.
It's okay, Mark.
I can have someone else do it.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, wait,
Hey, we'll FaceTime you.
Are we on liaison report?
No, we don't have liaison
we don't
tonight.
have that.
You have a council comment though?
No, thank you.
Rosemary?
Yesterday, the
The liaison.
the Broadband Advisory Committee, right now, it's still a committee, met, and we are officially still not recognized by the SEC yet, so there's really limited what the group can do. But we did meet it with the PDC, and there was a discussion on an executive director and hiring that, and we're not sure whether we're gonna hire one person or to hire a company to do it for the first 5 or 6 months to get it off the ground, but that was a big topic of the discussion yesterday.
Company's a good idea. Company's a good idea.
Company, because there's a lot of different
Talent.
phases of that one person can't do, so I thought that was a good idea too.
Okay, Jess?
I have one thing, the 4th precinct opens on the 11th, which I think is tomorrow. It is tomorrow. Yeah. It's at noon. I'm really excited about it. It looks really good. My son is ecstatic because his school is right in front of it, so.
Oh, that's good. Michael?
I just want to just let everyone know that the Human Rights Commission is having a forum this evening at MoCA at 6 p.m. about mental health in our community. I've stated before many times, and I know we all agree, this is one of the most important issues that we face as a community, particularly those who suffer from mental illness. And I really appreciate the work that the Human Rights Commission is doing in partnership with many nonprofit organizations and professionals to bring awareness around this issue. And it's free and open to everyone. And it'll begin at 6 p.m. tonight at MoCA.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
I just wanted, while we're talking about this, this past weekend, I know Mr. Berlucci and the mayor were there at LIDA and also at MoCA. They had a thing called, as a Healing Inc., I believe is what it was called, and it's the tattoo artists from Israel and other places around the country came and did tattoos for selected people who were impacted from the May 31st shooting, and it was fairly fascinating
Wow.
to see.
Yeah.
First off, the level of detail that they were doing and talking to some of these guys. I talked to one Israeli tattoo artist, and you can't get an appointment with this guy for years. He's booked up. He generally charges $700 to $1,000 an hour. And he was there working on tattoos for 2 days, free. So, I mean, whoever ended up getting, $20,000, $10,000 worth of tattoos in 2 days or something like that. So it was impressive, but it was nice to see the folks there and to see the outreach, because, there's more and more people trying to help out with these things in a variety of different ways, and it was really, really neat. And I don't know that they got a conditional use permit, Mark, so you might want to.
I haven't heard anything.
No, I'll tell you what, that's just one of a number of remarkable events that we go to that demonstrate the will and resolve of this community. This morning, Sabrina and I had an opportunity to attend an event where Building Homes for Heroes donated a free home to a disabled veteran. That was one of the most touching get-togethers that I have ever seen. And people like J.P. Morgan Chase and SAIC and a group of other people, they totally renovated the home, all new HVAC, new plumbing, new anything, absolutely no mortgage. And then once again, I'll tell you what, it was moving. They drove him in. He had a police escort, and they had the Freedom Riders that came with them and everything. And I'll tell you what, it was a neighborhood event, but it was a phenomenal event. And I'll tell you what, it, really did our city proud. One other thing, a sad note, Dame Maureen Baracco passed away. And she was the leader of our National Day of Prayer for a very, very long time. She was a remarkable woman who was a prisoner of the Nazis in World War II and a French freedom fighter and everything. And she took that adversity and and turned it into opportunity to inspire many, many, many hundreds of people. They actually did a documentary on her life. And so once again, we wish her well. The other thing is I submitted a revision to the speaker policy. It was recommended, especially for, it's on the second page, and I just wanted to bring it out so we'll have some further discussion on the non-agenda items. And there was a discussion of fairness about limiting people, 3 speakers to an item, especially if we get an item that is worthy of discussion. So what we're going to propose, and for further discussion, under 2.3, that instead of time allotted, we would do 60 minutes of, open mic, and just allow, the speakers that come up and not limit a number of speakers to a particular item, but give them the latitude going forward. And I think this might be an item of fairness, but I just wanted to bring it out from the get-go. Jess and John.
When it comes up, I don't know that I will, but I may offer an amendment to also televise our open mics when this comes
Well,
up.
I was just about to
Jess.
bring that up.
Oh, okay.
It's
Sorry.
okay, John. Well, I do really think, especially after the last meeting, we should seriously consider televising. I had a number of people reach out to me and ask me where the resolution I drafted wound up, and I basically said, well, we haven't had a lot of time to address it, and I haven't pushed it because I feel that that's the case. But the one question I had, would there be a mechanism of notifying these people that they are being moved to the next meeting, or that they are included on the next meeting? Because I see that it says that that they're welcome to come and register for the next month's meeting. Does that mean they will automatically be signed up to be on the next month's meeting, or
That's not my read of it.
will they be prioritized
Yeah,
since they?
Mark, what was,
Well, the city clerk shall also advise speakers that comments may be submitted at writing at any time for distribution to city council, and that citizens are welcome to contact the city's clerk to register in advance to speak
I
the following
misread
month's
that.
meeting.
Well, okay, so then my question still is, so let's say we have, we max out our speakers and there's still speakers left who'd like to speak. Is there a mechanism that we can pre-register them so that they are on the next meeting's agenda?
no, we can probably accommodate that. Yeah, the idea is to allow, a broader spectrum and, not limit, especially, certain at times, hot topics are gonna evolve, and, I think the intent was not to limit to 3 speakers when the other folks.
One question, 4.0, modification of time limits to presiding office. Is that the mayor or the city clerk that will have the authority to?
That is always the mayor.
There are 8 members of city council.
Okay, just making sure.
It's the city clerk.
Yeah, we have the city clerk form of government.
Yeah,
and
that's
that's what we're trying to do.
You are the
Okay, but
clerk.
I just wanted to get it out for us to, consider,
The
rather than.
60 minutes was a proposal. If somebody feels like the numbers should be different, as we discussed, instead of doing it by time, you could also do it by just maximum number of speakers, which would provide more certainty to somebody who is signing up. I'm just telling you right now, you're 21, and we only hear from 20, but there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but this was just to provoke your discussion based upon the discussion that took place in the closed session last week.
I think an hour is a good place to start, and if we
And
prove
then-
it doesn't work, we can
Anybody
change it.
know how long we have typically taken, averaged out an hour?
If I'm not mistaken, I would just guesstimate that it's usually less than an hour, but certainly gives latitude that,
I would say that with 2 possible exceptions during my time, you've never gone over 30 minutes.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's, that would be
But on
my
those 2
assumption.
exceptional things, it was every bit of an hour or more.
Okay.
Of course,
Yeah, Mr. Leahy.
I would suggest that if you do televise them, you'll probably hit that hour just about every week, every
Oh,
month.
absolutely.
That's okay.
Yeah.
We're here to serve the people, not
Okay,
ourselves.
yeah, but, you know, certainly worthy of discussion as we move forward, trying to improve, you know, the process. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Okay, folks, under ordinances, resolutions, we don't have any
I have a,
planning items.
all right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, no,
No, I mean, you seem anxious, go ahead.
I am kind of anxious. I have an issue with number 2.
Okay.
We might have the same one you're having.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I have an issue with number 4.
I would like to add is if we are supplementing, and I understand we have an unwritten rule on council not to throw anything without in advance without really giving other council members awareness of it. So I'm not quite understanding how this is supplement on this agenda, but also I would like to add that we find a way to put in language that seeks additional funding or funding for the African American Culture Center in our state legislative package.
Okay, so let me go back. So under ordinances, resolutions, items 4 and 8A, we have speakers on. So if you have concerns about either one of those, we'll be hearing them.
8A.
4 and 8A. So, yeah. So
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about 4? Because this kind of blindsided me. And I'm curious as to why this became agenda-worthy all of a sudden.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Number 4, I guess why are we voting on that without any kind of a brief?
And any kind of
Isn't it
discussion.
already? Because we've had this thing about making sure people remove the tents at Sandbridge for years. I didn't realize this wasn't always.
it's currently legal to sleep on the beach. Well, the
Right.
chief's here. It's currently illegal to sleep on the beach, right?
It's illegal to sleep on the
It's
beach.
illegal to sleep on the beach.
Yeah, it's illegal.
8 PM to 8 AM.
But I thought there was a case in that the U.S. court said that the beach was open to everybody.
So then why do we need this?
So how can we prohibit the uses of the beach with tents?
I just don't think
You
we
can
should just
prohibit
adopt
sleeping on the
something
beach.
Same day it shows up.
I just think we should have had a heads up, because the interpretation of this is not a housekeeping issue. It's much bigger than that.
We got,
So we have speakers on, so if maybe the appropriate thing would be to defer it after we hear the speakers for a briefing.
yeah, that would be fine.
Great, I would love that.
And with respect to at least item 2B, are you here to speak on that one, Chief? The emergency detention orders?
No, sir.
Okay. So that, I know at least on the one that Mr. Mathias brought to me, the reason, Aaron, is this is the last meeting and he wanted to get it in for and that would be item 2B. He wanted to get that in at the request of the police department.
Okay.
So before the session starts, because we do not meet again until January. And I imagine that's probably the same thing regarding the public notice requirements that the mayor's.
Well, 2A arose after we had to cancel the second planning commission meeting because there'd been no advertisement.
I think we just, other people's failure to plan a notice isn't the public's emergency to have a process which we tell them we're gonna afford them and now we're not. And I just want you to think about the gun people that were just here the other evening. And what we told them about what our adding things to the legislative agenda process was, and why some of us responded to them, why they couldn't give them what they wanted, because we have a process for modifying our legislative agenda. And you may recall when this Councilwoman Wooten and Councilwoman Henley both had an item in October, it was late September, put it out there, what did we say? We need to have this, we need to have this hearing, we have this process. Now, if we're doing this, then we should be thinking that people are gonna say, okay, you guys, we wanna hear from you on January 7th, and you're gonna be meeting at the pavilion, because they're gonna say, hey, you have a double standard. When it's something you want, it's this. When it's something the public wants, it's not. I just don't think we wanna go there personally. I don't like it.
By the time we, would it be prudent to, at this point, just to defer that until we can have a discussion on it, and we can still get it to the General Assembly?
First meeting in January.
First meeting in January?
Yep, I think we should go out and discuss it, so
Yeah.
people can know. it.
Yeah, and then maybe we can talk about it in, an informal, prior to the vote. Fair enough?
I could live with that.
Yeah, Michael, did you have something on
Well,
this?
yeah, no, I just want to agree with the sentiments that have been expressed about adhering to the process as it relates to the legislative agenda. In my mind, and when I served on the Human Rights Commission, we took our discussions about the legislative agenda very seriously, and we debated them and deliberated those recommendations. And I think that having a formal package of an agenda from the city of Virginia Beach does carry weight in the General Assembly. And I can tell you, out of deference for the process, I've told stakeholders, including the African American Cultural Center and others, who have really meritorious requests, that I thought that we would be circumventing the process, and that I would recommend that the city write a letter, or potentially collaborate with the mayor to send a letter, which was less formal. So I think we have to choose.
Yeah, I did send a letter to the
Okay,
governor.
well then, so-
Okay,
so-
but would I recommend that we defer?
Okay,
this
so items, yeah,
Letter
okay, so.
He sent
Mr.
letters to the
Mayor,
governor for the
Items
African
2A and B, there's no speakers, so we consent to defer them until January.
Okay, and then add the culture, Aaron, should add the
Yes.
cultural center
Well,
to,
you'll bring something forward before January 7th.
Yes.
Yeah.
okay?
We'll bring something.
John?
You can stay on consent, but I'm voting no on item 6, but I do want to make a statement after the vote is over.
I'm also voting no on 6.
I have to ask.
Ready.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
6. This, maybe it's a different place, but I have done extensive research on these people with exemption for request. There's one in here that's registered in the Cayman Islands, has salaries $500,000, $1.7 million. That's this one that's In-Home Health LLC. I don't know how many people looked at all the details of their salary portion, but I don't think that they need the benefit of a tax exemption on their business personal property, given the robust compensation of their organization. That's just my observation.
Let me ask the city attorney on this. Mr. Stiles, are we voting on these individually?
Yes, they're all separate ordinances.
Okay, so, well, I
You
just,
can pull any of them out that you wish, or you can move approval as a group.
Okay.
well, I would
You
just,
want to vote nay on,
and I would suggest my colleagues likewise. There's 2 others that are highly, because we're giving away money for people who can
Sorry, which
afford to
letter?
pay it.
They're on, he's on 7.
That's on 7.
Which letter?
And that is the
Aye.
home help, it's actually I. Then E and F are both registered and established at the very same address in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
E and F.
The CEO of one, and the reason why I'm saying about these salaries, we base the assets and the income of people when we give them exemptions and deferral from taxes on their home. So I think there is a similar concept of parity when you look at some of these things. Not always, but in this particular case, I think it applies.
Want to just defer those 3?
Well, we can, because you all can look at them too.
Right.
And you might want to. But I'd like to still share with you what I've learned before we do that. The CEO of DC Art Institute of Virginia Beach is $310,000, and the CFO's $225,000, and they're asking for an exemption from $45,000 of business personal property. The DC South University of Virginia, also registered in Pittsburgh at the very same address, CEO of $325,000 and the CFO of $225,000, and it's an exemption of $49,000 in personal property taxes. But I think, looking at this, and not to go long because I've got a lot of things in our, we need to rethinking. We have a criteria for exempting homeowners from real estate taxes and fees. I think we need to start thinking about nonprofit doesn't mean low revenue. Nonprofit doesn't mean not well compensated. Nonprofit doesn't mean they don't have the ability to pay. And then someone else has to make that up. But we really need to think about some of these. Now, obviously, it doesn't apply to 991, $25.60. It doesn't apply to the things, the Sandler Center. But you really have to look at each one of these and pull their IRS statement and look at all this before we go away and give away tax expenditures. So
What I
that's just my
suggest
view.
is I'll read each one individually, and feel free to comment. We'll vote on each one individually.
Oh, we could just
they're,
defer,
they're
let's
on,
just.
they're on consent right now, there's no speakers.
I just think
So we can- Is the will of council to defer E, F, and I?
Well, could I just make a comment before we do this? Sorry, Guy, you were ahead of me.
That's all right. I just had a question. I assume from your comments, John, that we have no criteria established for approval of any of these?
No, we have.
Other than that they are 501c3?
Correct. We have said no occasionally when we've looked at big disparities of compensation. I know I've been here and voted no, we have, but there is not a criteria by which they are assessed.
The COG committee looks at them.
No, it's actually the Commissioner of the Revenue.
None of these.
Commissioner of Revenue.
Yeah, the Commissioner of Revenue, the policy that's actually within your package to sort of state the process.
Oh, it is? Where is it?
Yep, it tells you. Yep, it's in there. But there's no criteria by which he says this is good, this is not good.
Beginning of them? Correct.
When you look.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the,
Let's wait, because we still have, Mr. Berlucci wanted to say something.
I think it's, I feel compelled to say something on behalf of the nonprofit sector, which is that, really, I mean, nonprofits play a core, critical role in our community. They promote the arts, they promote social services, they promote health, they promote culture. And a nonprofit is a sector of our economy and a sector of our community that is equally valid to the commercial sector and to many others. And I think that and also they operate at, just as it says, it means that they don't generate a profit, but the product they produce is important and critical, and they're driven by the market just as much as a private sector entity. And I think it's a dangerous precedent to set that we would begin, making what appears to be arbitrary analysis of the financial statements of a nonprofit organization and then making a determination about the worthiness of that nonprofit and the salaries that it pays.
Okay. So based on like.
Senior citizens don't get tax exemption, also contribute to the community, and they can't make $1.7 million and get their property exempt.
Well, it's not a question of putting
is.
nonprofits in opposition with senior citizens. I think we need to establish a culture of a thriving nonprofit sector, and I'm concerned about the impact this discussion,
Well, I don't work
this
for a
discussion will
nonprofit,
have.
so I'm not biased by that.
So anyway, getting back to this, is it the will of council to defer 7E and F, which is DC Art Institute, DC South University? Does anybody here not want to defer it?
I do not want to defer it.
All right, does everybody else want to defer it?
I do not want to defer it.
I think we can have more information. We can talk about a criteria and ask Phil to re-examine these
On
particularly.
those ones?
Yeah.
Okay, then same thing on in-home health?
Yeah.
All right, so there's more people that want to go ahead and defer it, so,
Information, yeah.
I'm not in favor of deferring it, but,
I understand that,
all right, I just want to make that clear.
yeah. But I've
got
got to
you.
count,
All right.
got to count the
We got
six.
you.
Count it up.
All right, so then we will defer E, F,
And I,
and I. And then there won't be a nay vote on anything, correct? Everybody else is okay with these?
Are we deferring to a date certain?
How long is it going to take the commissioner to get back to us?
What's the question you would like him to answer?
Yeah, I imagine we want to get a kind of a report on his analysis.
So he
on this.
already provides a sort of one-page summary of what he perceives as the public benefit of the organization and then of the taxes that are sought to be exempted.
Yeah, I mean, the criteria is that we determine that it's for the benefit, where is it? That it benefit tangible or intangible of the city.
What you don't get, which I had to ask for, which he doesn't provide, is the actual IRS filings that they make, and the ones I got were a year old, so he should be able to get ones for 19, but that's what you don't get unless you ask, and that's when you see much more detail.
But that doesn't tell the story of why those salaries are being paid in the individual sectors.
I
So
don't
there are,
care
for
why
example,
they're being
healthcare
paid.
professionals demand a high.
I don't care why they're being
One at a
paid.
time, gentlemen.
Senior
January
citizens can't get
21st.
paid that and get a real estate exemption.
January
Well, if you want the
21st
best
is the second
nonprofits,
voting meeting.
that's what you have to do.
No, I
So-
don't believe that's true.
Yeah,
Salvation Army
we'll get an
works well, doesn't
explanation.
pay that.
It's not a
Okay.
rejection,
I
it's
don't
a
work for a
deferral.
nonprofit
That's it,
either.
we got it.
Yeah, I respect the
Okay.
position, I don't agree with it.
Okay,
Okay.
likewise.
At our last meeting, we talked about the in-house pharmacy. This is to, and that's why I called you. And we
I'm
can-
sorry-
we can-
sorry we
that's
missed.
okay.
That's
We
my-
can talk about it again, and see. But this is just an exploratory committee, a couple people from the school board, a couple people from the council, to look at doing an in-house pharmacy for all the employees. And you know, Chesapeake does, it saves them a lot of money, but also let's look outside of right here. I think there's gotta be other places in the, country that does this, but also, I mean, we may find out it's not a good idea.
Yep, that's
But in the meantime, we'll know for sure, because it's come up before, and we kinda got pushback on it. and-
Well, thank you for bringing it up, because I thought the old 2015 study was, you know, didn't help us
But
at all.
hopefully it'll be more informative.
That may even work too with the new trade deal that's supposed to lower the cost of pharmaceuticals. So
It's nice to know Phil Kellum watches us on TV.
Well, everyone's a star in this table. I did overhear
Very
that
kind.
you were interested.
Why don't you go to the podium?
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, right here, Mr. Kellum. I did overhear that you're interested in some of the elements of these applicants. And we give you a summary of what their general activity is, and we determine whether or not they are exempt from federal taxation. And those have been the criteria in the past. When I first accepted this duty, we had met with then City Attorney Les Lilly, and part of the reasoning of moving the duty to us was that we can look at their tax returns and make some determination on whether or not they are conducting themselves in a manner that satisfies the federal requirements. I'm a little out of breath. I'm not in as good a shape as I thought I was. Excuse me. It's not that exciting a topic right now, but anyway. So the criteria would be set by you folks, and I'd be glad to abide that. What I've tried to do is give you a summary and let you know that, not send you anyone that is not credible with the federal government. So that's pretty much where we are. But over the next couple of weeks, I'm glad to entertain any criteria that you all set in place, whether you want to go forward, retro, however you want to do it. That's up to
Barbara,
you.
and then Michael.
Maybe you can look to see if others are having some criteria that we might want to consider that get into this idea of, you know, are they paying rather exorbitant salaries and so forth, because
You mean others, other localities?
localities,
Yes, ma'am.
other entities. maybe
I'll be
are
glad to
looking
do
at
that.
this criteria.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be glad to investigate.
Michael.
Not to belabor the point, but in your professional opinion, do you regard it as an overreach for members of council or a body itself to make determinations about the worthiness of the salaries that are paid or the expenses of a nonprofit? I mean, or based on your experience, what do any other municipalities do that? Do you think it would be appropriate?
I'm going to investigate whether other municipalities do that. I think that, I don't want to call the form that we have now generic, but I do think the form that we have now meets the as Leslie would say, the red face test of, you know, they're abiding with the federal government, and it's a decision of the governing body to decide how far they want to, or how far they want to extend that criteria, or how limited they want to make it. I'm not ducking your question, but I think it's a subjective decision. I think that someone with your experience may be able to share a lot of how the value is provided by nonprofits to the community. Someone else with a pure business perspective may have an idea that, well, if they can afford to pay someone in a tremendous salary, then they ought to be able to pay a tax bill that is somewhat minuscule. And I think you just have to have a more global discussion about the entity, what importance it is to this community, as you all are the governing body. But that's opinion that doesn't matter, because you guys get to, I'll advise, but you guys get to decide.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Okay,
Thank
we're
you.
going to move forward now, and the chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed section pursuant to the exemptions from open meeting allowed by Section 2.237A11 Code of Virginia as amended for the following purposes. Public contract. Discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract, where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.237A29 dome site entertainment venue. Publicly held property, discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for the public purpose or of the disposition of publicly held property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A3, Kempsville District, Beach District. Personnel matters, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body pursuant to Section 2.237A1, council appointees, council boards, commissions, committees, authorities, agencies, and appointees. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Ms. Henley?
Aye.
Mr. Moss?
Aye.
Ms. Abbott?
Aye.
Mr. Rouse?
Aye.
Mr. Berluci?
Aye.
Mr. Tower?
Aye.
Ms. Wooten?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Lynn?
Aye.
Mayor Brown?
Aye.